We got to give them a few minutes to... I'm just giving people a few minutes to...
Get there, yeah.
Find their way here. Because, you know... These are road geeks we're talking about, so they like to take the long way.
That's right.
Oh, is that for me? Why, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I got the hang of your TV setup last night, Laura, so...
Okay.
I think I got this.
Cool.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we live?
Rumor has it we are. Let's see.
Rumor has it, rumor has it, rumor. Get our Adele on.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's Adele, right?
Right.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're live. Yep. Everybody can hear us, right? I'm gonna hope that everybody can hear us. I think we should be fine. Well, it is New Year's Eve. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year!
Today is a very special day because I get to bring my webinar shenanigans on the road.
Woo.
And I'm doing the show live in Hartford County, Maryland today. And our gracious host here is Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Long time no see.
I know, right?
And David Golub of EastCoastRoads.com is also here, so I will say that we are doing tonight's webinar in front of a live studio audience.
Woo!
I thought, as a way to preview the New Orleans Road Meet coming up in February of 2024, what better way to get people acclimated with the city than to do a webinar?
Yay!
Yeah, there's a concept you've never heard of. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to profile Southeast Louisiana, New Orleans Metro, which, since I first started visiting the place in 2017, has become one of my favorite cities anywhere in the country. I would easily put it on the podium today, given even after the fact of going to cities in all 50 states at this point.
New Orleans is definitely one of my favorites.
I hear that a lot from people who, like, if you go there, it's one of those places that you love. So.
Have you ever been, David?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right.
Well, I think I know what you need to do in February. All right. Let's see. I'm just going to give people another minute to file in before we get started. All right, let's get going here. So, on the YouTube front, I'm uploading content from the state of Arkansas, and I'm going to be moving into the Memphis, Tennessee metro area in the coming days, which is actually kind of appropriate because next week's show is going to be about Memphis. Doug is not here, unfortunately, but if he shows up before the end of the program, I'll get him to talk some Gribble Nation stuff. Bob Malm is also going to be putting out his annual assessment of progress on the North Carolina interstate highway system. You can expect that in the next couple of days if it hasn't already been published. And then there's going to be new stuff on the podcast that I'm actually going to be recording with Doug as early as next week. So it's going to be a busy month of January for that. And for your information, if you'd like to have more discussion about Louisiana roads, you can check out the virtual tour episode that I did back in November with Jason from 504 Road Trips. And we talked about I-10 across the southern part of the state. And we had a fairly reasonable time doing so. So that might be worth your consideration if you'd like more Louisiana content. All right. So this is the standings in the NFL. It's our New Year's Eve, our annual look at the playoff picture.
Woo!
I know we like to goof around with other subjects here every once in a while.
That's right.
But hey, look, the NFC East is well represented in these pictures. I have to say. Let's see. So I mean, the Eagles and the Niners are at the top of the conference. Detroit lost last night to Dallas. So it's really between those four teams for the top spot in the conference. I would say that the Eagles are kind of, the way it's shaping up right now, I would expect it to be San Francisco and Philly at the top. Those would be your top two seeds. And then it's a logjam of other teams that are still alive. New Orleans is in there. They're in the race for the division somehow because the NFC South sucks. They're beating Tampa right now as we speak. That game is taking place down in Tampa. So if things break right there, that division will go down to the final game of the season. And then there's a whole bunch of other teams. It's interesting to see how teams like LA and Seattle, who started off the year brutally, have come on here of late, and they might actually get into the postseason this year. So there's no shortage of surprises, that's for sure.
Yay, Ravens! Woo!
I mean, we are doing the show in Maryland, so
Yay!
I guess it's only fitting that the Ravens, aka the Purple Browns, are at the top of the conference in the AFC. They're playing Miami today, and they're winning at last check.
Well, good.
So I would say, yeah, I think that if Baltimore wins, then they wrap up the top seed in the conference. And then it's kind of everybody else after that. Cleveland is in the mix now. A team to keep an eye out for as we move into the postseason might be Buffalo, because they went on this really brutal losing streak in the middle of the season, but they've won 3 in a row since then, and they looked pretty good doing it. So maybe they're starting to piece things back together. And then who knows what the hell's going on in the AFC South, where you have 3 teams tied at 8 and 7. And I would say that 2 of those teams will make it. I would say that whoever finishes runner-up in that division will be a wild card. 3 out of the 4 teams are 8 and 7, and then the thumbtacks are not on this list for very good reason, because they suck.
What's their record right now?
They're 5 and 10, going on 5 and 11.
Oof.
Because they're getting smoked today.
That sucks.
It sucks to be. Let's see, but this is what I said before the season started, that they should have just blown up the whole thing and started over, because they're going to suck anyway. So just trade everybody, be like the Panthers, who have like 2 wins this year, and then you have the number 1 pick, and then you can really rebuild from there. But nope, we down here in Nashville, you know, we know how to build a football team. Yeah, you guys, you guys suck is what you are. All right, enough football. We're only 48 days away.
Woo! Yay!
I wonder if Peyton Manning and Eli Manning will show up.
Oh.
Because they have ties to New Orleans.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, their father Archie was the quarterback of the Saints. Go way back, like in the 70s. Yeah, the years when they wore the bags over their heads.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know if they still frequent the area, but they are from there originally.
I did not know that.
So if you attend this meet, you'll get to run into content creators such as yours truly, and, well, I'll represent Gribble Nation in case nobody else comes down, and then you have Jason at 504 Road Trips, and Well, I just threw Bucky the Beaver in there because I could.
I'll be there.
I might, you know what? I might try to get a mascot to show up.
Well, I was thinking your Bucky puppet.
Well, I could bring the. Yeah, that's true. I could bring him.
Yeah.
Am I the only one who thinks that that looks like an illustration from a Super Mario instruction book?
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, right. Okay. I have my coffee here. I gotta take a sip.
Coffee.
All right. These population numbers are accurate as of the 2020 census. It is the largest metro area in the state of Louisiana. What's worth mentioning is that it is not the largest, like Orleans Parish, which is synonymous with the city of New Orleans, is not the largest parish in the state of Louisiana by population. There are actually two that are larger. One of them is in the metro. That's Jefferson Parish, just to the west. And then the other one is East Baton Rouge Parish, which includes the city of Baton Rouge, the state capital.
Should we explain for people who may not be familiar with Louisiana that parishes are the Louisiana equivalent of what every other state except Alaska, and depending upon who you ask, Connecticut calls counties?
Yeah, so they're county equivalents. Yeah, for the simple explanation is they just go by parishes in Louisiana instead of counties. If you call something a county in Louisiana, they'll look at you like you have three eyeballs. So, the city was founded. The first French settlement was established in 1718. It was located at a prominent bend in the Mississippi River, and that's how it became known as the Crescent City, because when you look at it on a map, it has that crescent-like shape to it. The location was chosen due to it being the natural highest ground in the area. This became known as the natural levee along the Mississippi River. Where the bends in the river happen, that's where the sediment gets deposited, and that's where the natural high ground in the areas are established. The settlement was founded by Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne de Bienville, named for Philippe II, who was the Duke of Orleans. He served as the regent of the Kingdom of France from 1715 to 1723, between the death of Kings Louis XIV and prior to the arrival of Louis XV. Mardi Gras, capital of the world. Well, that is certainly the case. Mardi Gras is also known as Fat Tuesday. It is the last day of the carnival period between Twelfth Night and the beginning of Lent, which is Ash Wednesday. So that date moves depending on where Easter is. You know, it's dependent on moon phases, I think, or something like that. Like where the full moon is or something like that. Something like, yeah, anyway. So, this year, Mardi Gras is on February 13th, which is actually one of the earliest days on the calendar that it can fall on. Like, early February is like the earliest that it can happen.
Right, because Easter is March 31st this year. Or this coming year.
Yeah, so if you count backwards, Lent is 40 days backwards from that.
Yeah.
Right? So that's Ash Wednesday. And then your carnival period ends with Fat Tuesday and begins with 12th night. So whatever that period of time is, that's your carnival period.
Yeah.
So that's your crash course in the calendar in Louisiana. We have other flags here that I want to mention. So the coat of arms of French Louisiana is in the lower left. On the bottom is the French Creoles. And in the bottom right is Acadiana, otherwise known as Cajun country. It's a very interesting part of the country where French, Spanish, Creole, Cajun, and African influences all meet right here in the city. So you naturally get all sorts of very interesting Southern cuisine and language and cultural history as well.
I love all the fleur-de-lis on the flags. And speaking of Super Mario earlier, those castles are very reminiscent to me of the original.
You know what?
I hear ya.
It kind of looks like Bowser's Castle, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
I'll briefly run through pro sports in New Orleans. Let's see. The NBA side, we got the Pelicans here. They were established they were named the Pelicans in 2013. Prior to that, they were known as the Hornets. They were founded in Charlotte in 1988. They relocated to New Orleans in 2002. And then they were rebranded as the Pelicans in 2013, which is what they are today. Their previous adventure into NBA basketball took place in the 1970s with a franchise called the New Orleans Jazz. That franchise didn't do very well. They only lasted a few years in the area. They relocated to Salt Lake City in 1979, where they are known today as the Utah Jazz. Doug is not here, but I feel like we have to talk about hockey for about 30 seconds. New Orleans has never really had a solid professional hockey establishment. However, the most successful franchise that ever did play in New Orleans was the New Orleans Brass of the ECHL. They played in the city from 1997 to 2002. They were easily the most successful hockey team in the state's history. They made the playoffs all 5 seasons that they played in New Orleans. Other considerations for you: Tulane University is very big in New Orleans. Their athletic teams are known as the Green Wave. I didn't put them in here, but Louisiana State University, or LSU, deserves an honorable mention. People in New Orleans go crazy over the Tigers as well. In baseball, the longest, again, no Major League Baseball in New Orleans. However, they did have long-running successful minor league franchises, the longest running of which being the original New Orleans Pelicans of the baseball scene. They played in the city from 1887 to 1977. Then there was a gap, and then the Denver Zephyrs relocated to New Orleans in 1993. They were basically kicked out of Denver because the Colorado Rockies became a Major League Baseball expansion team. So they relocated to New Orleans, and they had some modest success. They were rebranded as the New Orleans Baby Cakes in 2017, which is one of the most absurd name changes in baseball history.
I love it.
I'm not surprised you love it. But they did not last very long under that branding. They relocated to Wichita in 2020, where they are known today as the Wind Surge. Easily the biggest sport in New Orleans is football. They've had some dalliances into the USFL with the New Orleans Breakers, both in the 80s, and a reincarnated version of that in the 2020s. They even tried out arena football. That didn't go very well. They had the New Orleans Voodoo around the year 2010. The rebooted Arena Football League now has a team out in Lake Charles, Louisiana, that's also going to be called the Voodoo. But easily the king franchise, or the queen franchise in New Orleans, is the Saints. They were founded as an expansion NFL team in 1967. They played their first few seasons at the old Tulane Stadium uptown. Here it is. And then they moved into the Superdome when that was built in 1975. City of New Orleans has hosted quite a few Super Bowls. The first 3 Super Bowls that the city hosted were played at Tulane Stadium in the 60s and 70s. And then the Superdome was built, and that building has hosted another 7 Super Bowls.
Including the one that the Ravens won in 2013. Woo!
Yeah, there's something about Baltimore teams and the banks of lights going out. I don't know what it is with them.
Oh man, that was like the most stressful thing ever because we were doing so well, and then the bank of lights went out, and then like.
I remember, and then the game really turned.
It did.
From there, yeah. And they had to hold on for dear life to win that game.
Yes, they did.
But yeah, that was the most recent Super Bowl that they hosted, which was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And the city will host its 11th Super Bowl, the 8th Super Bowl in the Superdome, in February of 2025. So a year from now. Which is why I ain't doing this road meet next February. I don't want to get stuck in the middle of that.
No, I don't blame you.
If you've never been inside the Superdome, I really recommend, even if you're not a sports fan and you're into like cool like public spaces and engineering and stuff like that, it's something that I recommend that you do. I got inside the dome in 2017 for an event. I bought tickets all the way at the top of the upper level there, right where roughly the 50-yard line is. And this picture doesn't even really do justice to it, but I just sat there at the top of the stadium and just stared at the roof for an hour.
Wow.
Like, it's just the amount of open air space that roof spans is just incredible. It was an engineering wonder of the world when it was completed in 1975, and even almost 50 years after its construction, it's still regarded as one of the premier sport venues in the United States. It's also kind of got an iconic shape to it, and it's become one of the most famous buildings in the city. Like when you look at pictures of the skyline, it's hard to find one that doesn't have the dome in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's in a city full of classic architecture and going back to the 1700s and all that. It's really interesting that one of the buildings that it's most famous for is this.
Yeah.
You know, go figure. Okay. So here's something else we should talk about. Now, you guys might already know this, but I'm obliged to tell you. New Orleans is in a very unique position due to its location relative to water. In order to protect the city from flooding, over 2,000 miles of earthen levees, flood walls, and flood control structures have been built within Greater New Orleans. The Flood Control Act of 1928, which was passed in the wake of the Great Flood of the Mississippi River in 1927, authorized the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to build and maintain a flood protection system for the Mississippi River, while providing legal immunity to the Army Corps of Engineers in the event of levee failures. And of course, this would come back to become an issue in future years. A follow-up act of 1965 in the aftermath of Hurricane Betsy expanded all of this control of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to the entirety of the flood protection system around New Orleans, not just those Mississippi River levees, but all the levees that you see here highlighted in orange. And these are not all the levees. These are just what I think are considered to be the most important ones. You can see how there are levees along Lake Pontchartrain, and there's levees out east here, out near the Gulf of Mexico, Lake Bourne, out in that area, and then the levees within the city limit itself. Funding of an improved levee system in the aftermath of Hurricane Betsy in 1965 was approved. However, by 2005, almost 40 years later, 40 years after funding had been approved, construction was relatively slow, and only about 70% of the entire system had been completed at that point. Mm. Flooding in New Orleans had long been a known issue, and this probably goes all the way back to the settlement in 1718. The city, as you can see on this map, is basically surrounded by water. The Mississippi River, which runs through it, Lake Pontchartrain to the north, and the Gulf of Mexico to the south. The Mississippi River drains water from 32 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces, passing New Orleans at a flow rate of 600,000 cubic feet per second, or about 7 Olympic-sized swimming pools per second.
Wow.
Yeah. As the city and the suburbs grew in the 20th century, so after World War II, there was a big engineering boom. You know, there innovative pumping systems and levee construction techniques were invented during the war. And they were brought to New Orleans, and it was a great thing in that it allowed the city to develop. However, it also kind of had, I guess you could say, negative impacts as well. As these suburbs within the city and then outside the city grew, the areas that were developed upon were previously swampy wetlands that were by and large below sea level. These areas were drained, the groundwater was pumped out to make them develop so that they could be developed upon. This has led to about 50% of the city limit being below sea level. Adding to the problem is land subsidence, resulting from that groundwater being extracted over the years, resulting in the underlying soil compacting underneath the weight of the development that has taken place. A 2016 NASA study was conducted using aerial photography and radar, and they have estimated that parts of New Orleans are settling by as much as 2 inches per year. And these are mostly areas, if you look at, I mean, this doesn't show all of it, but most of the areas that they're talking about are up near the lake. Those are the lowest lying areas. So what this slide is showing you, we take a slice from A to B, and this is showing the cross-section of elevation change. Ironically, the safest place to be in the event of a major hurricane is right on the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
Because that's the highest ground. And as I said, even in the worst flooding events, the old city or the French Quarter did not flood.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to escape high water, the safest place to be, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but you want to be near a body of water.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in the middle of the city here, where much of the city's cross-section is shaped like a bowl, and you kind of see that in this cross-section. There are many other slices you could take, like going out this way, or going out here, or going across like that, or across like this. From levee to levee, you have a bowl shape that takes place, which, as we will talk about, is a problematic setup. So we're talking about land subsidence of about 2 inches a year in some areas. Land that was already low-lying is sinking even further as a result. In addition to that, there's sea level rise. New Orleans has experienced sea level rise of about 18 inches over the past 100 years, and that trend is expected to continue, perhaps at an accelerated pace over the next 100 years. So all of this sets the stage for, I think you all know where I'm getting at here,
Yeah.
where we're going here with all this, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. Yep.
On August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall near Buras, Louisiana, in Plaquemines Parish, and then again near the Pearl River Delta at the Mississippi state line. The chaos of it all has meant that even today, we don't know exactly how many lives were lost, nor has there been a consensus on what counts as a Katrina-related death. Counts range from anywhere from 986 to over 4,000. The official death toll as presented by the National Hurricane Center is listed at about 1,400. Damage across the Gulf Coast was estimated at about $150 billion, the vast majority of that being in Greater New Orleans. About 75% of the city was flooded and up to 10 feet deep, following the widespread failures of the city's flood protection system. It's estimated that there were about 50 separate breaches of the city's levees. The majority of the failures were caused by overtopping, as was the case with the Industrial Canal and the levees that encircle New Orleans East. However, the most catastrophic and consequential failures were caused by structural failure, having been built to below design specifications, and this was the case on the 17th Street and London Avenue canals. The supporting piles of these levees were not driven deep enough into the ground to support the added force of the water against the underlying soil. As part of the $15 billion hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system approved in the aftermath of Katrina, the failed levees were rebuilt and new defenses were constructed, such as the Lake Bourne Surge Barrier in New Orleans East and the Seabrook Floodgate Complex near Lakefront Airport. As was the case dating back to the 1960s, These new hurricane protections were designed and funded on the basis that they would be adequate to protect the city against a 100-year storm event, or a storm that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. Now, this has ramifications for the insurance business, as the Federal Flood Insurance Protection Program is only available in designated FEMA flood zones with at least 100-year flood protection in place. However, as early as 2024, it is possible that the flood protection system around New Orleans may no longer be adequate to this 100-year benchmark due to a variety of factors, including increasing sea level rise and land and levee subsidence. It's unknown what this would mean long-term and whether large swaths of greater New Orleans would effectively become uninsured in the face of future storms. Plans have been proposed for even stronger flood defenses. However, at a price tag of over $50 billion for a long-proposed 500-year flood protection system, which was recommended in the aftermath of Hurricane Betsy in 1965 but ruled out due to its high cost, it is unlikely that the funding will ever be made available for such a system, especially as other coastal American cities, such as New York and Miami, fight over available funding for their own flood protection systems. The cost of climate change is really starting to bite, and there is no easy solution for anyone, least of all New Orleans. Now, when you look at a picture like this from, I believe this was taken on August 31st, a couple of days after the storm, as the city was underwater, it is hard to imagine how a city that's hit this badly could possibly rebound from something this catastrophic. However, if you fast forward 18 years, on the surface, things appear to be fine. The city did rebound. It's estimated that about 90,000 permanent residents left the city after the storm and never returned. Most of these people resettled in places like Houston, Memphis, and Atlanta. The city rebounded to a point and it kind of stalled. And so that's kind of where, and there's a variety of factors for that. I don't really want to get into the political leg of this. That's a show in its own right, I think. New Orleans politics.
Oh, jeez.
But yeah, so the city has recovered to a certain extent. And, you know, I think that Katrina served as a bit of a wake-up call as well, in that, you know, we realized that this city, in some respects, is a miracle that it even exists, considering its location. And it could easily be taken away, and it very nearly was taken away 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And so these are the kinds of places that, when I visit them, they mean a little bit more to me, because I recognize how special they are. And we're very fortunate to have a very unique place like this still.
Yeah.
That we can visit and enjoy and all of that. I can't wait to share it with you people. So there are other places on the meet weekend. I just want to show you a couple of things here quickly. The Flooded House Museum is located where the breach in the London Avenue Canal took place. There's an exhibit on the inside that you can see. It's like a diorama that recreates the flood damage.
Wow.
And then there's exhibits here about the history of the flood protection system in New Orleans over the years. This is the London Avenue Canal. Now, it's worth remembering that the Army Corps was held responsible for the failed design of the original system that failed during Katrina. However, as I said, the Flood Control Act of 1928 meant that they could not be sued for damages. So the residents of New Orleans did not have any recourse against the Army Corps, even though it was their own failed design. I mean, that's another discussion that we could have for quite a while if we wanted to. Other failures, such as the Industrial Canal in the lower Ninth Ward, they were again caused by overtopping, and these walls were built back much higher than they were before. But you also have your pumping systems and all that are in place. The Ninth Ward is, I think, the lowest lying part of the city. I think there are parts of it that are about 8 or 9 feet below sea level. And after Katrina, I think about 25% of people rebuilt. So there's large areas of that neighborhood that are just empty lots now.
Yeah.
Well, one such lot that did rebuild, if we want to talk about music,
Yeah.
the Fats Domino House
Nice.
is alive and well. They're on Fats Domino Avenue. I forget what the original name of the street was, but that is worth passing by, I would say. Now, this is over in the Gentilly part of the city. The old Sea Saint Studios. Some random guy named Paul McCartney was in New Orleans in Yeah, he actually went to Mardi Gras in February of 1975, and he recorded. Yeah, there he is, right down there. That's him and Linda. He was here for Mardi Gras, and he recorded the bulk of his album that became Venus and Mars at that studio. The studio no longer exists as a music studio. It was flooded out after Katrina. But the building is still there, so you can go and see that if you'd like. The New Orleans jazz influence is very audible on the Venus and Mars album, and then when he toured in 1975 and 76 around the U.S., the Wings Over America tour, that he brought the brass band with him for that.
Nice.
And there are songs on the follow-up album as well, Wings at the Speed of Sound, that kind of there's some carryover into that album as well.
Cool.
Yeah. You want to talk about streetcars?
Yay! Streetcars!
We can't talk about New Orleans without talking about the streetcar system, which was pioneered in the 1870s. I believe it was the nation's first reliable electric streetcar system. So it's it was a model for the rest of the country, and it still runs today. The main line that runs up Canal Street is what I've pictured here. There's also the very famous line that runs along St. Charles Avenue. That's always a nice ride. That's something that I'd recommend that people do. If you're in the area and have a day or so to kill, and you want to just hang out in the city, take the streetcars around town and just kind of. Like, if you take the St. Charles line out, you'll go through the Garden District and you'll see all the old, houses and the beautiful architecture and all that stuff. So that's what I would recommend.
Oh yeah, I rode both lines when I was in New Orleans back in 2018. Highly recommend.
Uh-huh. The St. Louis Cathedral, which is one of the centerpieces of the French Quarter. There's been a church on that site since 1718, when the city was established. The current building was completed in the 1850s. The Jackson Square here in the foreground is complete with the statue of Andrew Jackson. Again, this is, like, if I go back a slide here to this shot, this is one of the quintessential New Orleans shots, I think. This is the picture that everybody always sees on, like, whether it's the Weather Channel or somewhere on YouTube, oh, what's going on in New Orleans? And they'll show you this shot. It's one of those iconic shots in America, I would say. If you ever get to go inside the cathedral, that I would recommend you do that, because it's just beautiful on the inside.
Do I see horse and carriage over there?
Oh yeah, those are horse and carriages. There's been talk about banning cars outright in the French Quarter over the recent years, but I don't think that's ever really gotten anywhere. Some of the streets, like the back streets, like the side streets that are still cobblestone, like they have banned cars from parts of those areas. There was a push, I think a couple of years ago, that kind of died in the city council just to ban cars between Canal and Esplanade, and then from the river to Rampart, which is what the French Quarter is defined as. but that never got anywhere, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can tell. Here's the Joan of Arc statue, and the across the street from the French Market, which is located right on the Mississippi River. Oh yeah, speaking of the French Market, I love my coffee, and the Café du Monde has been operating since 1862 at this location.
Yay.
So I always can't resist a stop there when I'm in town.
Gotta get your vignettes?
Vignettes?
Did I say it wrong?
Well, I mean, you can call them that if you want, but I prefer to call them beignets.
Beignets. I knew I'd mess up something on this. Accent-wise.
That's fine. I mean, hey, man, you can call it whatever you like, man.
Bourbon Street! Woo!
Or Rue Bourbon in the original French.
That's
as
right.
It shows up there.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the iconic streets in the United States, I would say.
Oh, yes.
Known for its vibrant nightlife and very impressive Southern cuisine.
Yeah?
And its to-go daiquiris.
In fact, me and Corco, back in 2018, we were both in town for the American Planning Association National Planning Conference. We met up and went to Bourbon Street.
Well, you know, that's always a good choice, I'd say.
Yeah.
If you're into American war history, New Orleans also has something for you in the form of the Chalmette Battlefield, which was where the Battle of New Orleans took place on January 8th, 1815, which was a decisive victory for the American army against the British. It was the final major engagement of the War of 1812. It's a war that everybody always forgets exists, but yeah.
Battle of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Wasn't that like the top song?
Yes.
In like
there was a
1950.
song about it.
Yes, but it was like the top song of like the year, wasn't it? In like 1958 or something like that.
That sounds
That could
familiar.
be.
Yeah, it could be.
I think Johnny Horton was the musician.
Of course, you know, we talk about the War of 1812 being forgotten as we sit here in Maryland, where we've got a significant number of War of 1812 historical sites.
That's right.
Not all that far from here.
Yeah.
So, yep, I'm very familiar with the War of 1812 for that reason. Good
Yep.
old Fort McHenry.
Yeah.
I love. I just want to address in the comments. Yes, I know, Pelican Guy, that Bourbon Street is a tourist trap, but I feel like it's one of those places you gotta visit once to say you've been there, be like woo. And yes, thanks also for bringing up that Fat Domino's house is on what was originally Cabin Avenue.
Okay.
And yes, I was correct. Johnny Horton is the musician of the song Battle in New Orleans. I will figure out. It was number one on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1959 and the number one song for 1959.
Okay.
So I was close. It was a year off.
But regardless of the song, we don't pronounce it New Orleans, we pronounce it New Orleans.
Nolans.
Yeah, so the city is pronounced New Orleans. The parish is Orleans. I know it's kind of weird how that works out, but that's how they pronounce it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about the history behind how it wound up that way?
I don't.
I don't either. Pelican Guy?
If anybody in the chat wants to help us out.
Yes, please.
I'm just kind of going through some cityscape photos here.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean there are so many drop dead amazing shots.
Wow.
Around the city. You know, it's hard to pick one that's my favorite. All right. Would you like to talk about roads?
Yes, please.
All right, I'd love to.
Roads.
So to understand why the roads of New Orleans are the way that they are, we have to go back to the year 1946, which was the year that the master plan for the city was published in that year, was published. It was commissioned by the city, and it was outsourced to some random guy you might have heard of named Robert Moses.
Never heard of him.
Yeah. Cities around the country were very eager to commission him to get his opinion on the state of things in their cities and what they should do to address the coming traffic problems that they rightly forecasted would come in the years after World War II.
Yeah.
And the 1946 plan, I'm going to come back to this in a second here.
I mean, I feel like Robert Moses was commissioned. He was everywhere in the 40s. Lots of cities.
Yeah, a whole bunch. Yeah.
Baltimore included.
Yeah. I know he did studies in Pittsburgh and Chicago, I think. And, like, he was all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so very early on they recognized the need for a Mississippi River bridge at downtown and radiating highways out from that bridge, which, if you kind of look at the map today, that's kind of sort of what we ended up getting. I'm going to go through some of what happened there as we go forward here.
With a major exception, as what we can see from what we can see.
Well, yeah, we are missing this piece of it along the river, but we will deal with that. I do want to talk also about U.S. highway designations in New Orleans. The city was the historic southern terminus of several U.S. routes. 11 came in from the northeast. 51, 61, and 65 originally were a triplex that came in from Airline Highway. And this is going back to like the 1930s. And then in the 50s, when AASHTO started to get rid of unnecessary multiplexes, 51 was truncated back to Laplace, where it currently ends. It's not pronounced Laplace, people.
It's pronounced like actual French.
Yeah. 11 was truncated somewhat out to Irish Bayou in New Orleans East. And 65 was... I don't even know where 65 was truncated to. I think it used to run all the way up 61, up into Mississippi. But it no longer even enters Louisiana anymore. So in the years after World War II, these designations changed. But the area around, like where Tulane Avenue meets Broad and Claiborne, that area used to be a pretty significant terminal intersection where a bunch of U.S. highways came together. That it isn't really the case anymore. The only U.S. route that ends there now is 61. Here's the map I was kind of alluding to before when I was talking about the French Quarter. You can see how it's outlined here. So it's bound by Canal Street and Esplanade, and then Rampart in the northwest. And that was the original definition of the French settlement in the 1700s. As the decades went on, there was expansion further away from the river, like the Tremé neighborhood was established, and the Marigny neighborhood, which was considered the first real quote-unquote suburb of the city, that was established in the years after the initial settlement. Over here on the left, we have a work-in-progress map of the New Orleans freeway system. I would say this map is probably from about 1968. You can see a lot of I-10 is in place. The Mississippi River Bridge is in place. Some significant dotted lines on the map here. A riverfront expressway, I-610 across the north side. But a lot of the freeway system was in place by the early to mid-60s. I actually have this map in my office. I don't know if I've ever shared a picture of that.
You have with me, actually.
Have I showed you that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was an impulse buy, and I bought it and I framed it, and then I realized I didn't have anywhere to put it. So it just kind of sat on the floor for a while, and now it's hanging up in my office at work.
Cool.
Actually, my map doesn't have the river outlined, it just has the streets.
Oh.
So you can kind of tell like where the bodies of water are because
Yeah.
oh look, there's no street here.
Oh.
Okay, that must be where the Mississippi River is. Yeah. So if we replace that with this, now I think things can be explained a little bit better. And I'm going to. I haven't used this tool in a while.
You're right, you haven't.
Well, it's kind of annoying to use, so I don't really bother with it that much, but yeah. So I-10 kind of does this and goes out that way, and then the 610 is the one that runs across like that.
So, is there a reason why those two aren't swapped?
Sort of. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think you're gonna cover that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Later, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And if we take a wider view of the metro, you have. So this is where we just were, and then out west you have the airport, which is out this way, and then you have the 310 spur out here, and then out here is the 510 spur. They were planned to connect to each other, but we will talk about that as well during the course of the program. And you have the causeway going up across the lake up to the North Shore. All right. Well, let's see here. I-10 west of the city of New Orleans. Suburban Jefferson Parish, north of the Mississippi River, and it connects with New Orleans Airport. It also connects with Causeway Boulevard, which takes you to the causeway over the lake. The most interesting engineering part of this highway is the Bonnet-Carré Spillway Bridge. The spillway itself was constructed in 1931 in the aftermath of the Great Flood of 1927. This is one of those flood control projects that the Army Corps undertook in the aftermath of that. It was that first wave of levee and flood control projects after that flood. The Spillway Bridge on I-10 was completed in 1971. The never-ending New Orleans Airport flyover program was begun in 2019. The new terminal for the airport opened in 2019, yet for some inexplicable reason they did not construct the flyovers to the new terminal, or they did not begin construction on them until after the new terminal was already in place. This caused about 3 to 4 years of traffic disaster in this part of the city of Kenner, where the airport is located. The new flyovers were not operational until November of 2023. At the same time, there is construction going on as we speak on Loyola Avenue at I-10 for the state's first diverging diamond interchange, which is happening right underneath where the flyovers are right now. And those ramps are now in service. And the DDI is supposed to reach completion in the first half of 2024. Now, New Orleans Airport, well, before I get into that history, I'll show you that the old terminal access roads are still in existence and can still be driven for the most part. You can't drive up to the old terminal, but you can drive around like some of the old roads because they still have the rental car center out this way for some stupid reason. So you have to, when I flew in here in November, they tell you when you get on the bus that it's like a 25-minute bus ride because during the day, with the traffic being what it is, it's still, because you got to go all the way around the airport and all the way around the runways to get to the rental car center, which is on the opposite side of the airport.
Wow.
They never relocated the rental car center. So,
wow.
Yeah, well, I got there like late at night, so the ride was only like 15 minutes. But still, it's really ridiculous how this is set up. But you can't, so the fact that there is still some employee parking and the rental car center is over this way is why you can still drive a lot of the old access roads. That might be a meat highlight, actually. Because it's kind of like this weird mix of abandoned stuff that's still sort of used but not really. It's a bizarre setup. I don't know if you knew this, but did you know the airport code for New Orleans Airport?
It's MSY, and it's named for somebody.
It is named for somebody.
Yes.
So the MSY code is very counterintuitive. You would think that it would be like something that's more easily guessable. You know, these FAA codes tend to be a bit predictable, but MSY obviously on the surface has nothing to do with New Orleans. But it comes from Moisant Stockyards. So before the airport was built in World War II, it was built by the U.S. Army. It was used as an airfield and then transferred to civilian use in 1946. But before the airfield was built, there was a stockyard on that site. The stockyard was named the Moisant Stockyards, and that was named for John Moisant, who was a daredevil pilot whose plane crashed in the field where the stockyard was eventually built in 1910. So John Moisant becomes Moisant Stockyards, becomes Moisant Field, which is the name of the airport, which then eventually becomes New Orleans International Airport, and they simply retained MSY as the airport's code all these years later.
Is that generally what's done if an airport changes names? Because I know in New York, JFK used to be Idlewild, but
right.
The code for it is JFK.
You know who would be the expert on that to ask? Anthony.
Mm.
Yeah, he knows everything about that stuff. Well, when we did our discussion on Denver, the original airport was Stapleton, and that code was DEN. They built the new airport out in western Kansas, which is now the Denver airport, but they moved the DEN code to that airport because it was a 1-for-1 switch. Because Stapleton was closed after that. So it does vary depending on where you are, I suppose. The Pontchartrain Expressway. This is a fun little discussion that we can have. So do I even have it in here? I don't think I put it in here. But one of the things that was made apparent in the 1946 master plan was the need for the construction of a highway to connect the new Mississippi River Bridge with downtown and Jefferson Parish out to the west. And what they ultimately decided on was a corridor like this, partially overtop the original Pontchartrain Boulevard around the west end of the city. So that's where it gets its name. It was the first freeway to be completed in New Orleans. Parts of it were opened as early as 1958 in conjunction with the Mississippi River Bridge. It was opened as far west as Claiborne Avenue. It was opened out to Tulane and Airline in 1960, and then out to the west end in 1962. So let me also do one other thing while I have this open. So local lingo, because this highway changes designations and because the direction tabs on the roads reverse, so you go from being on, say, I-10 East to Business 90 West if you're going in the same direction.
Oh, wrong way concurrency.
No, it's not a wrong way concurrency. Business 90 ends at 10.
Okay.
So what happens is if you stay on the same expressway, you go from going eastbound to going westbound, even though you're going straight, which is very confusing. So what the locals have done over the years is they have just said, screw it. We're not going to call it eastbound or westbound. We're going to call it riverbound and lakebound.
That makes sense.
So for instance, if you're listening to traffic reports on WWL and you hear them talk about the Riverbound Expressway, they're talking about traffic going in this direction towards the river.
Huh.
Right? If you hear them talking about the Lakebound Expressway, they're talking about traffic heading this way, out of the city. Lake Pontchartrain is up in this area, just off screen, right?
Yep.
But it makes sense if you look at it on the map. That's where those terms come from, riverbound and lakebound. And it's all to kind of get around that confusing scenario where you're paying too much attention to the road signs. I know the signs should exist to help you, but in this case they don't really help you that much. So that's the story with that. We also should address something else that's a bit of an oddity, and that is the never-ending saga of the future I-49 corridor, which was approved in the late 1990s to run basically along US 90 between Lafayette and New Orleans. In the city of New Orleans itself, it was approved to run along US 90 Business, which is the downtown portion of the Pontchartrain Expressway, and then also the West Bank Expressway on the other side of the river, which we'll talk about in a moment. The 49 designation was conditionally approved, however, it is many years away from being actually constructed to interstate standards in most of southern Louisiana. So in the interim, the FHWA approved a temporary designation of I-910 for basically the section of US 90 Business that's already freeway standard, and that would be the Pontchartrain through town, over the river, and onto the West Bank. However, Louisiana DOT did not follow through with the designation, so it remains an unsigned designation. And I suppose the reason why they did that was to avoid confusion, because it only would have been an overlap. They would not have removed US 90 Business. So why add another route to the mix? You know, if it's just going to be an overlap, and it's not really going to help with navigation.
Right.
I think that was kind of the broader point.
Is it recognized in state documents, or is it only recognized by the federal government?
I believe so. This is kind of where it gets a little foggy. I believe it is recognized in the FHWA, but not in Louisiana circles.
Got it.
So Louisiana has the option of using it because the feds approved it.
Yeah.
But as of right now, there's no signs for it. It's unlikely that there will be signs for it. Unless they tear down the Claiborne Expressway, which we'll talk about in a little while. That's a little bit of a teaser for you.
Yes.
Because then that designation would be useful.
Yes. So I do wanna say, Will Carpenter asked if the speaker can turn up their volume a bit, please. Which, are you having? I guess the question for the chat is: are you having problems hearing all of us, or me or David? Because me and David are further from the laptop.
Yeah, that would be a useful
thing to know.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Place your bets now. Yeah, because I think I could check the settings. I mean, I think I'm coming through okay. I mean, it's showing up on the screen here. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh crap! Okay, so Will's saying that everyone, and Jason is saying it's pretty bad. I have the TV all the way up.
Well, I don't know what I could do about that. Yeah, because I'm sitting like right over top the mic, and I'm talking right now. So I don't know what else.
What does that do?
Well, this is.
Is that the speaker volume or the microphone volume?
Well, I don't know if it's it might be the speaker or the microphone. I'm trying to see if it'll make any difference here. Hello?
Okay, Jason's saying turn up the mic auxiliary setting about 30%.
The mic auxiliary setting.
MIC/AUX.
Looks like it's maxed out.
Well. I mean, it's turned all the way up. I don't think I can turn it. Yeah, it's turned all the way up on here. and yeah, I don't want to mute it.
Yeah. Sconson saying, need a boom mic. That's the speaker. Jason, it's the levels being fed into OBS Studio. It's okay. It's right in the middle of the screen at the bottom.
Well, yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Try checking the volume control in Windows.
I mean, do I got to do this?
And this is all Greek to me.
Volume 0 decibels.
I've never had to change this before, so I don't know.
Go back to your taskbar.
Sconson, check the hamburger. 504. Go into your audio settings and in control panel.
Well.
Okay, that's basically what I was saying. Go down to the taskbar.
Where's the task?
Down at the bottom.
Down here?
No, all the way down.
What do you mean all the way down?
Like
all
the
way
Windows?
At the yeah, the Windows taskbar, all the way down at the bottom.
So this?
Hang on. Okay.
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
Over to the right.
Like here?
That's.
Well, it's.
Yeah, try clicking there.
Well, this is gonna be.
Mr. Mate NWK. I can hear Dan and Laura. Okay, God love this is a little faint, but I have louder speakers.
Let's see. Is there a scroll down here?
Yeah, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You know, we did a mic check when we started, and I didn't hear any complaints from anybody. So I'm not sure why we're having audio issues now. So.
Well, it's a good thing I know how to be loud.
Yeah.
Fortissimo for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah.
How about fortissimo?
Fortissimo.
Yeah. FFF.
FFF.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, because as I said, this is not something I've ever had to do before. So,
Wisconsin, ow my ears. So maybe we just need to be conscientious about being loud.
I don't know how we're gonna fix it when we've already started the stream. That's the problem. Like if people, I don't want to start screwing around with stuff.
I think we just ask people, turn up your volume if you need to.
Well, I'm gonna be interested to hear what it sounds like when I play it back later, because as I said, I've never had this issue before. So.
Do you want me to go into another room and see what it sounds like on my phone?
Sure.
Why don't I do that?
If you want to do that.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
While you do that, I'm gonna keep talking about aerial views in the city. Yeah, you could open up the stream. Is that what you're gonna do?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, she's gonna go into her dark room. Yeah, so aerial views here. Let's see. These are the kind of drone views that I really like. You can see the detail on the overhead signs, which I think a lot of these gantries are like original to the construction in the 1960s.
Yeah, it sounds fine on my phone.
All right, we have a vote for it sounds fine on Laura's phone. All right, well, you know what? We're going to have to edit out that 5 minutes there. All right.
Oh, Wisconsin, use Mike's ham radio setup. If I knew a single thing about it, I would, but I don't. And Mike is out with Rainey right now, so.
Yeah, Mike's a little busy. Well, I mean, Laura's right here, and
I'm right here!
And I'm talking on top of the microphone, so I'll try to keep my voice up if that's a problem for people.
You want to sit closer, David?
Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Or you could sit. You could probably sit here. This will be a better spot.
Yeah.
For you.
Okay.
And you get the recliner.
Yeah, see that? You're in the power chair now. All right, so we mentioned the West Bank Expressway, which was the first, which I would say is the first highway project in New Orleans to be undertaken. It was begun in 1954. It was part of the 1946 master plan. It connects the Mississippi River Bridge with the West Bank suburbs in Gretna and Marrero. The original divided highway was constructed from 1954 to 1958. This included the construction of the Harvey Tunnel in 1957. It was not built as a freeway originally. It was built as a divided highway. And this highway was upgraded to freeway standards in the 1980s and 90s. Beginning in 1977, the first section to be upgraded was the high-rise bridge over the Harvey Canal, which was completed in 1984. That's this section here. The Harvey Tunnel is one of the old relics of the original divided highway, and that remains in service today as part of the frontage roads now for the elevated expressway. So this is the Harvey Canal high-rise, which is one of my favorite spots in all of Greater New Orleans. You have an interesting visual like this of the tunnel going underneath the canal and the high-rise going over it. The tunnel is currently closed to traffic for a long-term rehabilitation project. So we will see at the time of the meet if we'll be able to actually walk the sidewalk that runs down through it, which you can see here. That'll be something worth following up on in February. Yeah, and then you get money shots like this. You know, if you're a drone pilot, like New Orleans is a place where you could like just hang out for 6 weeks and have a blast. This is another one of my favorite shots of the whole city. And then you have the 180 degree shot here. Notice how in the distance there you have the Mississippi River Bridge, and the expressway kind of does a loop on itself. It loops almost 180 degrees in the opposite direction to cross the river on an east-west alignment. By the way, when you're crossing the bridge facing west into downtown, you are technically in the eastbound lanes. That's how that works out, and that's why the directional changes reverse on the Pontchartrain Expressway, because you're still going east, technically. Yeah, so that's where the root of that confusion is. Okay. I have a feeling that Laura's going to want to step up to the plate and say something.
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about the highway along Claiborne Avenue, which was built mainly... It was not part of the 1946 master plan. This was added in a supplemental study in the late 1950s. It was anticipated that there would be a great increase in traffic coming in from the east into downtown. And it was decided that the proposed riverfront corridor would not be sufficient. So they came up with this elevated stretch along Claiborne Avenue, which was constructed from 1966 to 68. Before I turn it over to Laura, I will mention to you that one of the parts of the I think I have it in one of these pictures, don't I? Well, maybe not, but the flyovers that connect I-10 to the Pontchartrain Expressway were completed in the 1980s, around 1990. They were not part of the original freeway system, so it was not the easiest thing in the world to get from the Mississippi River Bridge to I-10 East and vice versa. Those flyover ramps were completed around 1990. All right, what do you got?
A lot.
All right, go for it.
So, Claiborne Avenue, for more than a century prior to the construction of the expressway, was the backbone of economic and cultural life for Black New Orleans. It was also very well known for its oak-lined avenue, It was home to more than 120 businesses along it at the time. Unfortunately, today there are only a few dozen of them left. Basically, on Ash Wednesday in 1966 is when bulldozers first started uprooting the oak trees and began replacing them with concrete columns. There's a lot of significance in that the construction began on Ash Wednesday.
Well, they had the Mardi Gras parades there the day before, probably.
Well, they did, but also it's just the fact that you have one of the most solemn days in the Christian calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And it is when you start to see the destruction of Claiborne Avenue. Basically, 100 small businesses were destroyed. And then, there was an issue with the property owners of the homes and businesses getting the proper fair market value for the properties. Because, the sad reality is, racism is a big reason why, somebody asked earlier, why does the highway do a bend? So why, we'll talk later about the Riverfront Expressway some more. Why was that one not built?
Mm-hmm.
And why was this one built?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of who was living there and the amount of political and economic power that they had. And the reality is that white-owned properties in the Central Business District were taken for 6 and even 7-figure sums, but on Claiborne Avenue, 5-figure amounts were the norm. And then you had the issue too that businesses, most of the value comes from the business itself, and not necessarily from the cost of the land. So in order to move a business, there's significant costs that go beyond the land. So basically, you had, that, it's just, it was a devastating loss to Black New Orleans that has never really been, that's kind of left a gaping wound.
It should be mentioned that Claiborne Avenue historically was one of the main streets of the Treme neighborhood, which goes back to the 1700s. It's the oldest African American neighborhood in the United States. It's recognized as that. So that's where a lot of this is coming from, I think. It's a complicated issue because by the 60s, the demographics of these neighborhoods and their neighbors was changing. There was people moving out of the cities anyway. It's a difficult thing to try to explain all in 5 minutes, but it obviously had a detrimental impact on that neighborhood and effectively walled off the historic Black neighborhood from the more affluent downtown and French Quarter. That's without question. As far as the causes, the economic causes, the political causes, there's a lot that goes into stuff like that. But and then the bottom line is that the folks of the Treme did not have the ability to fight back the way that the people of the Marigny did.
Right.
And that's something that we'll talk about with other examples of freeway shenanigans in the city.
Yeah, I want to add some more recent history. So we've talked a lot on this channel about highways that are like what to do about some of these highways, right? Do we tear them down? Do we try new redevelopment efforts under or around the highways? And so with the new community reinvestment grants, what's interesting is the Claiborne Alliance put in for their own proposal, which was basically to do a study of to affirm whether or not removing the highway would be the best interest, or looking at other alternatives, while the city of New Orleans submitted a proposal And their proposal was basically about, paying for repairs and maintenance work, as well as building a public market and performance space under the highway. And the city of New Orleans, theirs was accepted. But so far, the Louisiana DOT has only received a portion of that grant, which includes removing some of the dangerous on and off ramps that make it difficult for pedestrians to safely walk in the neighborhood beneath the expressway, as well as proposed projects as far as better lighting and pedestrian bicycle lanes. The Claiborne Avenue Alliance, their thought on all this is that it's pretty misguided. There's NPR did a very good story that was published earlier this month about there's a playground underneath Claiborne Avenue in it's Hunter's Field Playground, and it's completely empty pretty much all the time because children are smart, or not even children are not. It doesn't appeal to them to play on a playground where they hear thump, thump, and deal with noise and air pollution. And so it's, a matter of, okay, we could go through all the effort, the Claiborne Alliance's thought is that you could go through all the effort to to design something under the freeway, but is it going to even be successful? The reality is, and I know I've talked about it a lot on this channel, and, it's something that I've thought a lot about, right? Because, for the people that live in this neighborhood, they, it is quoted in this article, removal is the only cure. And, they're right now putting together a study to measure the environmental impact of the highway on, the noise pollution, air pollution. And, it's something that, in my eyes, the way I think of it is, if you were to get a surgery and you were to have like a metal plate or something put in you, I have a very good friend who actually had this happen, right? They got a metal plate and some screws in their ankles. In their ankle. And it got infected. So what happened? They removed it. And, the doctor didn't say, oh, well, too bad, it's there now. So you're just stuck with it, Oh, if you have to amputate your foot, then too bad. Instead they, and now, and of course in their particular case, they had the metal removed and had, some other, non-surgical ways to, help their ankle and foot. But it's just,
I think, so that there's kind of an impasse as far as what to do about this at this point, but they're going to have to figure something out because the useful life of the elevated structure is coming up in the next few years. So they're going to have to make a decision one way or the other, whether to rebuild in place or take it down and restore the avenue to its original, visual. Now, there are pros and cons to building and removing versus, rebuilding versus removing. If they were to take this down, my guess is that they would redirect I-10 onto 610, and then the Pontchartrain Expressway would then, that's probably where you would see Louisiana exercise the 910 designation for the existing section of it. Because then it would serve a purpose as an interstate spur into downtown. And so these freeway removal things are very tricky because the freeway was built on the basis that a lot of traffic would come into the city from the east, and that's exactly what happened. So, if you remove the freeway, you're not going to remove the development that came because of the freeway. So now all this traffic has to have somewhere to go. And my guess is that 610 and whatever the heck you want to do at the Pontchartrain Expressway is not going to cut it. So that's going to have ripple effects outside the city as well. So unfortunately, these things that happen that are, ridiculous wrongs that are made, unfortunately, they have a certain permanence, even if you remove the freeway, because then there are consequences that take place outside or well outside of view from Claiborne Avenue, they still have ripple effects and consequences outside of even the city itself. You know, all the people who commute into the city from St. Tammany Parish and Slidell, they use this road to get downtown. So now to remove this highway, which I don't think is necessarily a bad idea, but you remove it, 90,000 cars and trucks a day have to go somewhere. And that's the problem. Now you divert those cars and they become other people's problems. And we will see when we talk about Houston, because there's a freeway removal that is imminent in Houston. I'll just tease it by saying this much, that, you know, it's nice that they're going to remove a section of highway, but when you look at the master plan of what they're removing, it's kind of a joke, actually. But, you know, and they're going to widen all these freeways and make all these cars other people's problems instead. So that's kind of, you know, to bring it back to New Orleans here, like, yes, you can remove this highway, and yes, I'm not necessarily against the idea, but you also have to be mindful of the ripple effects downwind from that. You know.
Right, and yes, there is a lot of studies and a lot of consideration that would have to happen.
But I think that, like you said and like I just said, you know, they have to kind of figure out what they're doing sooner rather than later.
Right.
Because no matter how you slice it, the rebuilding of this viaduct is coming due in the next few years. So there's ideas for what to do, but for now the city is kind of punting it because they don't want anything to do with it. But they're going to have something to do with it eventually. Yeah. So anyway, from one controversy to another, with 610 across City Park, which was constructed mostly in the 70s. The right-of-way for 610 was acquired in the 50s and as late as 1966. This is another highway that was not part of the original master plan from 1946. However, it was added as part of a bypass of the northern section of the city. It allows traffic along I-10 to bypass downtown. Contentious right from the start, this highway through City Park. As early as 1958, there were contentious public hearings about this highway alignment through City Park, which is the single largest green space in New Orleans.
Yes, it's actually it's 1,300 acres. It's the 87th largest and 20th most visited urban public park in the United States. It's actually approximately 50% larger than Central Park in New York City.
Yeah, which is crazy to think
about.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that's worth mentioning here is that long before 610 was built, the park had always been bisected by a railroad corridor, which was very active and is still very active to this day. And most of the section of 610 that was built roughly parallel to that railroad. And that's where the right-of-way was acquired. So that was basically the city and the state's argument, was that, look, you know, we already have the railroad, we're going to build the highway right next to it so that we're not creating this other huge swath of land that's being carved up. We're just going to kind of use what's already there. Environmentalists protested. A federal law that was passed in 1968 prohibited the use of parkland, city or state parkland, as the route for highways unless there was no suitable alternative and no steps were made to mitigate damage to the green space. Lawsuits were filed. However, the state eventually prevailed on the basis that the land had been acquired prior to the law taking effect. The land had been acquired in 1966, 2 years before the law took effect. 610 was eventually constructed in the 1970s on this right-of-way.
Yeah. It's worth noting that, speaking of oak trees, City Park actually holds the world's largest collection of mature live oak trees. Some that are older than 600 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those are those huge, like, bayou oak trees that were likely just all in the wetlands before the city was developed upon. Yeah. All right, we're going through the greatest hits here because now we come to New Orleans East.
Woo! Which, and well, I'll ask you. You go first, and then I'll ask you a question about. I've got a bunch of stuff.
What do you want to ask me about?
Sure. Well, I was just gonna ask. So, you know what? No, actually, you give your introduction and spiel first, and then I'll give mine. And...
I-10 across New Orleans East was constructed in the mid-1960s, beginning with the construction of the high-rise bridge over the Industrial Canal, and was completed in 1972. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that New Orleans East, quote-unquote, refers to a planned development in the eastern part of the city. Nowadays, it's kind of become synonymous with the entirety of the city east of the Industrial Canal. However, back in the 70s, New Orleans East only referred to a certain planned development that was to take place well out in the wetlands east of downtown. This neighborhood and this part of the city has a very strange and unfortunate history. After World War II, there was virtually nothing out this way. It was all undeveloped wetlands for the most part. But as I alluded to before, so much of the land was drained and developed upon. And this was years before we understood the importance of wetlands to an environmental ecosystem and stuff like that. So development took place in the 1960s as the suburban lifestyle migrated out to the eastern part of the city.
Right, because the idea was, and a lot of cities, other cities were doing this at the time too, that as suburbanization started, that, that they tried to bring some of the population back by developing the outer parts of these city limits. Because this is still within New Orleans.
Yeah.
So the idea is to try and, keep people from moving even further out and creating a more suburbanized urban area.
Yeah, they wanted to give people the suburban lifestyle while keeping them within the taxes of the city of New Orleans,
yes.
Without them moving across the lake, which unfortunately they ended up doing anyway. The bulk of the development here took place in the 60s and the 70s during economically prosperous times. The downturn of the 1980s, which was also known as the oil bust, resulted in a lot of the middle-class families that helped establish this area. They relocated. They no longer had work in this area, so they left. This created a vacuum that was ultimately filled by lower-income families, and as a result, land values declined, crime increased, and unfortunately, this is one of the most economically depressed areas of the whole city.
Yeah, this whole area was meant to be like a new town. New town in town. So it was sort of like Reston, Virginia, or the woodlands north of Houston. But only a few small portions of it were actually built in that 20-year time frame before the oil bust.
Yeah, and parts of I-10 were constructed to make way for future development that never took place. If you look at, it's more apparent if you look at it on satellite, but there are 3 interchanges constructed between Paris Road and Irish Bayou at US 11 that were completely graded, and some were paved, and there were overpasses built for connecting streets and developments that never were constructed as part of the original New Orleans East vision. But they were built, and only the one at Michoud Boulevard is partially used at this point.
Yeah. What's interesting is that a lot of that land that you see now in the satellite view later became the Bayou Sauvage National Wildlife Refuge, which was established in 1990 and is the largest urban wildlife refuge in the United States.
There was actually talk in the 50s and 60s about building a new airport out there.
Yes.
I don't think it lasted very long, and the problem I'm sure they ran into is the same problem they discovered when they were building the suburban development, was that there's just no solid ground anywhere around this area. It's all just clay and mush, basically.
Yeah.
There's nothing to build a solid foundation for anything substantial out here. So that's part of why the airport idea died. And also, this was around the time when people were like, hey, wait a second, should we be draining our wetlands to build stuff out this way in the first place? But yeah, so that was kind of an interesting, quiet proposal that I read about a couple of times and thought it was kind of goofy.
Yeah.
But
I want to talk a little more about New Orleans East.
okay.
I want to talk about two prominent residents, one of which you may have heard of. Another, if you're a Ravens fan, you would have heard of. Which, by the way, the Ravens won today 56-19.
Ah, okay.
Woo! But anyway, so Ruby Bridges was the first African American child to attend desegregate New Orleans schools, and she is the subject of the famous Norman Rockwell painting, "The Problem We All Live With," from 1964, and she is a lifelong resident of New Orleans East. She attended William Frantz Elementary School in 1960, and she sadly, sadly she actually lost her home during Katrina, which also greatly damaged William Frantz Elementary School, but she played a significant role in fighting to keep the school open, and she's now chair of the Ruby Bridges Foundation. And so the other, the famous Baltimore Raven is Jacoby Jones.
I don't know that name.
Yeah, so he played for the Texans from 2007 to 2011. Then he played for the Ravens from 2012 to 2014, which pretty big years, as we were talking about earlier, with the Super Bowl.
That's right.
But also he's also known for two memorable plays in the game known as the Mile High Miracle, which was the Ravens-Broncos game in the 2012 NFL
that's
playoffs.
Right. Yeah.
He caught a 70-yard game-tying touchdown pass in the final seconds.
Which I remember watching that live, and I'm like, wait, what the hell just happened?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then he had a 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown in the Super Bowl.
And then the lights went out.
Yes, they did.
Pretty much right after that, I think.
Yeah. But it's pretty cool that he actually got to play in the Super Bowl in his hometown. Yeah,
that doesn't happen very often, I would imagine.
No, it doesn't. And what's kind of cool is even though he later played for, why don't I have it here? He played very briefly for that Allegheny County team.
Yeah, we won't name their name.
Yeah,
but,
And there was another team he played very briefly for. But but he wanted to retire as a Raven, so the Ravens signed him back for one day so that he could retire as a Raven.
Yeah, cool.
But just one more thing I wanted to add about New Orleans East. Speaking of reputations, that it's the area. Even though the Ninth Ward was there, and many of the black homeowners there were kind of cheated out of the road home program, with their rebuilding costs being undervalued. New Orleans East is trying to rebuild. The people there are really, they're really trying to create, vibrant community, and there's a lot of, important things out there. NASA has a branch out there in New Orleans East. You have also the Crescent Crown, one of the largest beer distributors. We already mentioned about the Wildlife Refuge, as well as the Audubon Nature Center is out there. But also, too, there's...
As we transition into I-510.
Yes, and we'll go into one major redevelopment, the major redevelopment project that's happening off of I-510. But also, there's $25 million being reinvested in the redevelopment of Lincoln Beach in New Orleans East, which was a historically black beach.
Yeah, I was going to mention that later on. Yeah,
well, cool.
But I didn't know that there was a fund set up for that.
Yes, and when we talk about that later, I can go into more detail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 510 is a short spur connecting I-10 with the bridge over the Intercoastal Waterway, which takes you down into St. Bernard Parish. It's also known as the Green Bridge, and I know I have pictures of that in here somewhere. There it is. See, it looks green, doesn't it?
It's very green.
It has looked horrible for years. I have pictures of this bridge from 2017. These aren't it, but if you put those with these pictures from 2023, it looks the exact same. Like, it has looked terrible.
So it's a historically green bridge.
Well, yeah, the original paint scheme was green, and that's how it became known as the Green Bridge. It was built in 1967. A repainting project did actually begin in late 2023, so finally this bridge is going to get a paint job.
Yay, are they going to paint it green?
Yeah,
Good.
it will be restored to its original color.
Yes.
Yep. Unfortunately, we won't see it in time for the meet, but it will be done in the next couple of years, I think. Now, the other thing that really is interesting about New Orleans East and this part of the city is if you like abandoned roads and uncompleted stuff of any kind, you will see plenty of that in this part of the city. These parallel overpasses for Dwyer Road were built for future development in this part of the city, but were never completed. This is a section of Dwyer Road that was built. There's a drainage canal, so it was all kind of... They built the roads in anticipation of development that never came, basically. And this is all within eye shot of the interstate.
This seems like something that could be interesting to develop into some sort of like park or bikeway or something like that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because right at the junction of where 10 and 510 come together is the now infamous Jazzland site, which was built as an amusement park in 2000. It was New Orleans' first amusement park since the closure of Pontchartrain Beach in 1983. The park was rebranded as part of the Six Flags Empire in 2003. It was closed in August of 2005 with the arrival of Hurricane Katrina. The flooding because of the levee failures in the area inundated the park in up to 10 feet of water, and the park was never reopened. And it has remained abandoned and unused to this day.
With the exception of temporary filming for like TV and movies.
Yeah, there's a good amount of that stuff that goes on, and there's, in spite of the fact that there's full-time security presence on these premises, it is a urban exploration hotspot to this day, and you know that so the property was owned by the city of New Orleans for a number of years, like from 2009 to 2023. There have been many false starts in terms of people coming up with ideas of what to do with this place. Some of them involved recreating the amusement park thing, and then other proposals have involved creating retail space and hotels. The site was sold by the city in 2023 to the Bayou Phoenix business venture, and they have their own vision for the site, which I will get to in a short time here. But I want to go through some of these pictures just so you can see what is still here. The park was basically left untouched. Some of the rides were salvaged by Six Flags after the storm and taken to some of their other amusement parks, but most of the rides remained in place and obviously have not been used in over 18 years.
What's really cool is apparently Bayou Phoenix is going to evaluate the structural integrity of the roller coasters and rides on the site to see if any of them can be restored, although they make zero promises.
Yeah, I can't imagine any of this being salvageable at this point.
Yeah, I don't know either.
You know, it would be a cool idea if they could do it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's even doable at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. 18 years is a long time.
Yeah, the tallest coaster in the park is the one that's front and center in this picture. That's the Mega Zeph, which actually is a callback to a roller coaster at Pontchartrain Beach, which was called the Zephyr.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's how they came up with the name for this one.
Cool.
But here's the Bayou Phoenix proposal. You can see the you can see kind of the layout here. And so there's going to be a mix of retail, and there's a water park involved, there's athletic fields, art studios, film studios, there's a hotel. This is all on the existing footprint of the Jazzland site. And if you go to here, you can see this is I-510 on the far left of your screen. This is that lagoon that you saw in the pictures. If I can just show you, I didn't do it before and after, but that is, what did I do with that picture? Where is it? Here it is. Yeah, so here's that lagoon that's in the rendering. So you can see what that area would turn into. A lot of new green space, again, retail space, hotels, water parks.
They're really hoping to make it a destination place for multiple different audiences, because they're based off of what I've read, they're trying to, with the sports complexes, they really want to draw in a lot of different sports tournaments. They want to keep film production crews going there, so that's why they're gonna put in all the studios. And creating the water park, so that there's kind of the theme park aspect in addition to the having retail and hotels and everything.
Here's the problem with this whole idea: no one's gonna go here. It's such I mean, you laugh, but the problem is that it's in such a bad location to begin with. It's way out east. Most of your metro area lives in the city or west. So you'd have to go all the way across the city and then get all the way out here just to get to it. And frankly, this is not a very appealing location to build anything right now. The way that things are going in the city, I'm not even going to get into the specifics of it. This is just not a very appealing place to try to build something like this. If you were going to develop this into anything at all, you would have to build something that would be big enough that it sort of transcends the location. So, just to give you an example, let's say, this isn't going to happen, but let's say that the Saints built a new stadium, and they built it here. That's a big enough thing that it transcends whatever economic and political issues are going on, and then people are like, oh, well, the Saints play here, so I'm going to go out here. It doesn't really matter what else is going on,
So you really think that a water park and all that stuff wouldn't be a draw?
Not at this point, no. I mean, the problem, it really didn't, Jazzland never really caught on when it was open.
It didn't have long, though, to even try to catch on.
No, but it was not nearly as successful as they thought it would be.
Oh, really?
And Six Flags taking it over kind of kept it on life support, I would say.
Oh.
It kept it around. It kept it going, because the original Jazzland was an independent thing.
Right.
And they were actually underwater after 2 years.
Oh.
Six Flags actually rescued them.
Oh.
And they kind of shuffled things around and made it sort of viable, but it did not have a certain long-term future, even before Katrina. So, and as I said, the location of this kind of thing matters. If they put this thing out in, off of Causeway Boulevard in Metairie, that's a pretty good spot to put something like this, because you're central to where all the people in the metro live. Putting it all the way out in the east, which means that everybody has to go out that way, and you don't, by the way, you don't even have mass transit that goes out this way. New Orleans is one of those cities that has the worst transit system in America in terms of service and ridership and all that stuff. It just does not, it's not a good transit city in general. It's a pain in the neck to get out this way in the first place. And then you're not really, I mean, okay, a water park is nice, but is it worth the trouble? That's kind of the question that people will ask. And
although, I love swimming.
I've heard that once before from you.
Oh, yeah, and my daughter absolutely loves swimming. So maybe I'm biased in that sense. that, ooh, they're going to put in a water park. And, oh, not too far from here, also New Orleans East, you have Lincoln Beach, which they're planning to redevelop. So
I do wonder if those are two competing things, or if the Lincoln Beach thing is its own separate thing.
My understanding is that it's its own separate thing, and that's, through the city.
Okay.
That, that the city is going to, it has, $25 million in funding to reopen the beach and, use it for recreation and tourism and stuff.
If you asked me what I would do with this land, I would tear all this down and I would restore it to its native state. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't, unless there's a huge reinvestment in the community out this way.
But I think that's the idea. I think the idea is that this project is supposed to be a way to jumpstart that.
But then you still have the issue of who's going to go, right? No, I mean, I get it. It's a difficult issue, and they've been trying to figure out what to do with this plot for almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
And again, this is the latest and greatest, and who knows if that'll even see construction, because we've had many false starts over the years as far as planning and stuff like that. But anyway, let's move back to roads.
Roads!
We talked about 510. I'll talk about 310, which is the spur connecting I-10 near the airport with the bridge on the Mississippi River and U.S. Highway 90. Let me see here. Opened in stages between 1983 and 1993. So would you like to talk about the proposed outer loop? I suppose we should do that at this juncture.
Let's do it.
So 310 and 510 were intended to be connected to each other. An outer bypass of the metro was proposed in the 1960s. Alternatives were studied, but no final designs were created or approved. The project was canceled in 1977 due to environmental concerns. The project did get so far as to receive an official interstate designation of I-410. It probably would have followed along the West Bank. It would have followed US 90, Lopalco Boulevard, and the Intercoastal Canal for most of its length before building a new Mississippi River Bridge somewhere east of Chalmette before the highway would cross, presumably on the Green Bridge, back into the city of New Orleans, where it would follow I-510 up to I-10. There is a map out there, and I don't have a copy of it, but it refers to this highway project as the Dixie Freeway. I don't know where that name comes from or what the inspiration for that is, but that was apparently a name choice that planners were going with in the early 70s. The area, the alignment that's highlighted in green here, that was the preferred alignment. As I said, there was no final decision made before the project was canceled in the 70s. But this is basically the gist of it. It would have provided the West Bank with another east-west highway, better connections to US 90 on both sides of the city, and better connections to St. Bernard Parish from the West Bank and vice versa. Those would have been the biggest benefits to having this highway. But I-410 joined the ranks of unbuilt New Orleans freeways in 1977 when the project was terminated. Right. Earhart Expressway, speaking of unbuilt freeways. What exists today was completed in 1971. I would say it's probably one of the most underutilized highways in all of Louisiana. It kind of runs an east-west path south of Airline Highway and south of I-10, but it doesn't really connect anything useful. It's very difficult to get to, and it ends at basically stubs at both ends. It ends at the parish line, and it ends at a random location further west near the airport. Plans to extend this highway westward to Airline Highway near the airport have been floated every once in a while over the years, but nothing has ever come of that. Plans inside the parish limits are a bit more vague. There's some question about whether this highway was actually ever intended to extend further east along Earhart Boulevard. But as I said, it ends at the parish line as it is. Here's the stub at the west end, at the Dickory Avenue off-ramp. Causeway. One of the more interesting drives in all of New Orleans, because when you go out, when you start out from either Mandeville on the North Shore or from Metairie on the South Shore, you get to a point around mile 10 out of 23 where land disappears in all directions, and you are basically driving out what you would imagine to be driving out in the middle of the ocean. It was an engineering marvel when it was built. The parallel spans were constructed in 1956 and then 1969. One of the things that this project did was it helped bring the New Orleans metro area to the North Shore. So communities such as Mandeville and Madisonville and places like that really grew quickly in the 60s and the 70s now that they had a bridge connection to the city.
How long is the causeway?
It's just shy of 24 miles.
Wow.
It's classified in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's longest bridge over water.
Is that still the case today?
As of now, that's what they classify it as, yeah. Yeah, so it is one of the only toll facilities in Louisiana. You pay the toll going southbound. It used to be a two-way toll, and then at some point, there was another toll plaza in Metairie before you started out northbound. But that was removed. I want to say that was like 20 years ago. They got rid of that.
How much is the toll?
They raised it recently. I think it was $5. It might be $6 now.
Okay, that's still a bargain for how long the
Holy
bridge
crap,
is.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, then a comparable bridge in the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is like, the toll is twice that, I think. Now, I think that's a two-way toll, isn't it? Or is it only one way? I don't remember. So it's been a while since I did that one. I-12. I'm going to run through these quickly here. Added to the interstate system in 1957. Was constructed in the late 1960s and early 70s. This is the highway that a lot of suburbia sprung up along, in part because of the presence of the causeway. So, these communities on the North Shore really benefited from having the causeway and the interstate. As a result, there have been improvements made this century in the form of improved interchanges. A third lane has been added to the main line in parts of it, especially further east towards Covington and Slidell. It's really the long-distance bypass for I-10 traffic between Baton Rouge and Mississippi. Most of that traffic will follow I-12, which follows the north shore of the lake. I-55 reaches its southern terminus outside of New Orleans at the Bonnet Carré Spillway. It kind of shadows the Mississippi River for a lot of its length, at least as far up as St. Louis. The first section of what would become I-55 was completed in 1960 in the form of a bypass around Ponchatoula. The Manchac Swamp Bridge was completed in 1979. That is the southernmost 20 miles of I-55, which in its own right is one of the longest bridges in the world and one of the longest in Louisiana.
Wow.
That link was completed in 1979, which completed the interstate in Louisiana. And the high-level bridge over past Manchac was the final link in that to be completed. Now, this is also where different old alignments of US 51 come together. Historically, US 51 followed an at-grade alignment through the bayou. And that original bridge was built in 1927. The bridge, if you look at the picture in the lower right, the bridge there on the left side of the picture was built in 1957. There was a movable bridge there that was replaced with this high-level fixed bridge, and then US 51 was moved once again onto the interstate around 1980. So in the area of the village of Acres and where the restaurant Middendorf's is located, you have 3 different alignments of US 51 all next to each other. The parking lot is the original alignment, and then just off of that is the second alignment from the 1950s, and then the third alignment is the current alignment, or the interstate, that was built. Middendorf's is a nice restaurant. You should go there sometime.
Ooh.
And I-59, one of the original federal aid corridors that was established in 1956. In Louisiana, it was built between 1958 and 66. The section over the Honey Island Swamp near the Pearl River Delta was constructed on embankments of about a 6-mile stretch of it. You can see it in this picture on the right that is built on embankments above the bayous. And it's also worth mentioning that 59 is a very prominently signed hurricane evacuation route for this part of the Gulf Coast.
Oh, before we get to the highway honorable mentions.
Uh-oh.
Apparently, the CBBT, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, as of tomorrow, will be $16 each way.
Wow.
21 in peak hours.
Yeah, it's a good thing I don't have to drive that very often.
Oh, but $22 if you travel it twice within 24 hours at all times.
Oh, that's right. They got that 24-hour thing, don't they?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm assuming that's all cashless tolling then, for them to be able to enforce that.
I mean, I assume that back in the day you would have a time-stamped ticket.
That's probably like their equivalent of a commuter plan,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay, honorable mentions, real quick. Because, it's not just the freeways that I want to tell you about. I want to point out some other stuff down this way that you might find interesting. So, take, for instance, the Gateway to the Gulf Expressway, which is the southern end of State Highway 1, way out in Lafourche Parish. The elevated highway was completed in 2009. There is an extension underway between Leeville and Golden Meadow that is in construction right now and will be possibly completed before the end of this decade. This is, again, one of the only toll facilities in the state of Louisiana. However, they are now 100% cashless as of the recording of this episode. Highway 23, if you are in Gretna and take a drive south along the west bank of the Mississippi River, you'll follow the Belle Chase Highway, which takes you all the way out to basically the mouth of the Mississippi River. It's the furthest south on the river that you can drive. You reach a small town called Venice, which is the southernmost permanent establishment on the river. Venice itself is a few miles upriver from the head of passes, which used to be an old lighthouse. There used to be a fully staffed lighthouse there. But I believe Hurricane Katrina put an end to that. There is now just an automated beacon there. And that's where the branches of the river divide at the head of passes in the delta. That's considered the official mouth of the Mississippi River. Not far from the head of passes also was the municipality known as Pilot Town, which was a permanent settlement that was only accessible by boat. And again, Hurricane Katrina put an end to Pilot Town. It used to have its own zip code.
Wow.
And it was a permanent settlement. It's where all the river pilots and their families used to live.
Okay.
But that whole operation relocated upriver to Venice after Katrina. So Pilot Town, I suppose it still exists to some extent today, but it's no longer a permanent settlement of any kind like it used to be. There's all sorts of interesting history. If you take that drive and you go through all those little towns along the river there, there's hundreds of years of history down there. It's really interesting. The other thing that's really interesting is the project going on at the Intercoastal Waterway on Highway 23. The Belle Chase Tunnel is, as of the recording of this video, no longer open to traffic. It's been closed. It is being replaced by the Belle Chase High-Level Bridge project, which is going to reach full completion in 2024. It's actually partially open at this point, so they've redirected the tunnel traffic, which runs southbound only, onto the new bridge. So there is traffic running on the new bridge as we speak.
Wow.
The 1968 northbound lift bridge is going to be closed later this year, and traffic will be redirected on, all the traffic will be redirected onto the new bridge later this year. The best part of this project is that it is a toll bridge, and you can imagine that that makes people who live around it very happy. But that was a concession that was made to ensure funding would be available for this project. And that's a whole nother discussion that we could get into, is what's going to happen once the tolling goes into effect on the bridge. What is that going to do to traffic in the area? We'll have to stay tuned on that. So we talked about the Harvey Tunnel, and we talked about the Belle Chase Tunnel, which is now no longer with us. The third of the vehicle tunnels in the state of Louisiana is all the way out in Houma, Louisiana, and that is the Intercoastal Waterway Tunnel, which was completed in 1961. So it actually is the newest of the three tunnels. The Harvey Tunnel opened in 57. The Belle Chase opened, I think, in 58 or 59. And the Houma Tunnel opened in 61. Highway 45, if you're interested again in getting lost in the bayous outside of New Orleans, this is an interesting road to take. The southern reaches of Bayou Barataria in Jefferson Parish and the village of Jean Lafitte can be reached on Highway 45. We talked about how the outer bypass, I-410, never saw the light of day because of environmental considerations, and this next one is another example of this. The Lafitte-La Rose Highway, Highway 3134, was planned as a divided highway to connect New Orleans Metro with Grand Isle and Port Fourchon on the Gulf Coast. The section of it that exists today was constructed from 1976 to 1980. Plans for this kind of a highway go all the way back to the 1930s, in fact. It would have shortened the drive between New Orleans and Grand Isle by over an hour. The section that was built includes the high-level bridge over the Intercoastal Canal, which replaced an old swing bridge. Environmental impact statements for the segment further south were completed in 1972. However, increasing obstacles on the political side and the environmental side, including the introduction of the Clean Water Act later on in the decade, meant that wetlands could not be reclaimed willy-nilly for random construction projects anymore. And that really put a stop to any construction south of the Intercoastal Waterway. The only phase of it that was completed, as you see here, involves this very weird southern terminus where the ramps become the main line, in effect. And there is a stub here that was built for a continuation. Spoiler alert, this will be included on the meet weekend.
Ooh.
So, I know you guys love your unbuilt highways.
Oh, yes.
So this will be included.
I do. I love looking at stub ends.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The bridge that was built, it's worth mentioning that the bridge over the waterway was built as a two-lane bridge. They funded it as a two-lane bridge. It was a fully expandable right-of-way that they could have built a twin span had traffic warranted it. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but that is an interesting thing to keep in mind. Let's see here. Where are we here? Highway 39. one of the quieter drives in the downriver parishes. This follows the east bank of the river through St. Bernard and Plaquemines Parish and takes you all the way out to Point Allahash, which is the parish seat of Plaquemines.
Hey, what is that structure?
Here?
Yeah, is that anything?
It's a floodgate.
Ah.
Yeah, so this is the levee, and the road and the railroad go through the levee flood wall, and then the gates will shut in the event of oncoming flooding or what have you.
Wow.
Yep. And there's another example of that here.
Wow.
Highway 46, which goes all the way out east towards the Mississippi River Gulf outlet in Lake Bourne, in the village of Hopedale. You have another similar situation here with, going outside the levee system, right? This area really took it on the chin with Katrina. It's actually kind of a miracle that structures like this bridge on one of the drainage canals in Hopedale actually survived the storm. The parish's Hurricane Katrina Memorial is located all the way out here in Shell Beach at the end of 46. And this is the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet waterway, which was such a problematic waterway when it was built. Basically, the storm surge from Katrina went right up the waterway and just took out everything in its path. And
Wow.
it really contributed to the flooding in New Orleans East and the overtopping of the industrial canal levees.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the aftermath of Katrina, the Gulf Outlet waterway was closed. It was barricaded off. There's now, you cannot use it as a navigable waterway anymore. Highway 407, we talked about possible traffic problems in the West Bank area once the toll bridge stuff takes effect on Highway 23. Well, this is the only other highway bridge over the Intercoastal Waterway in this part of the metro. So it is going to be interesting to see if this bridge, which connects the other side of the Intercoastal Waterway in the English Turn area with the Algiers section of New Orleans, sees a huge uptick in traffic once the tolling goes into effect here. That remains to be seen. By the way, this is another one of my favorite pictures from the whole metro. It is neat how, because of everything being at sea level here and there's no terrain whatsoever to speak of, you can see like a city skyline miles away, just clear as day.
Wow.
The National Southern Terminus of US 11 is located in New Orleans East. Remember how I said that it used to go all the way into downtown New Orleans, and it ended near Canal Street. Nowadays it ends right around, it ends out at US 90, out in the Venetian Isles section of the city. It also includes the May Street Bridge, which was built in 1928, which this bridge spans Lake Pontchartrain. It was one of the longest bridges in the world, in fact, when it was completed. US 61, known between New Orleans and Baton Rouge as the Airline Highway. It's in Jefferson Parish. It's referred to as Airline Drive. The single most interesting part of this highway, there are two things worth noting. This picture on the top shows the National Southern Terminus of US 61 at the corner of Tulane Avenue and Broad Street in Mid-City. And then we also have this very interesting 3-level interchange between Airline and Causeway Boulevard, which is known as the Flying Circle, because the second level of this interchange is a traffic circle where all the ramps feed into. The Flying Circle was constructed in 1957 as part of the road improvements due to the construction of the causeway, which had been opened the year prior. And you know what? These signs might actually be from 1957. Or somewhere shortly thereafter, because they sure look like they've been there for a long time.
Wow.
You see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, these signs on the right have been replaced recently, but the gantries are probably from the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
And then US 90. I regret to inform you that it is not possible these days for you to clinch US 90 between, say, New Orleans East and Waveland, Mississippi, and it's probably going to be that way for years to come. Bridge inspections that were done on some of the bridges in the Pearl River Delta at the state line basically revealed that some of these bridges were ready to fall down on their own. So there's currently an effort right now to find funding to rebuild some of these bridges, like this beauty, this vertical lift span. Some of the other bridges, like here, this is the Chef Mentor Pass Swing Bridge. This one is still in operation, but again, US 90 kind of dead ends out in New Orleans.
At 190, pretty much.
Yeah, you can't go past there.
Hey, look, Doug Kerr's here.
Which is too bad, because that's actually a pretty interesting drive. I did
Yeah.
that when I visited in 2018.
Yeah, it is an interesting. It's an interesting trip. I did the drive in 17, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the old bridges myself, but unfortunately, it looks like those are all going to be going away, and you're not going to be able to drive this anytime soon. Anyway,
At least till 2026, if not later.
yeah, I think in Google Maps, you know how it shows a road closed and it says closed until whatever.
Yeah.
Like I checked it recently and it said like closed until 2030. So you're telling me there's a chance? All right. Unbuilt freeways of New Orleans. We are going to revisit some of this. We've talked about some of this already, but I think it's worth rehashing it. The 1946 master plan. You can see this is one of the maps. These are a couple of the maps actually from the master plan. The lower left and lower right images. You can see where the Mississippi River Bridge was positioned, and it was kind of central to everything. You have the Pontchartrain Expressway, and then the original vision was for the Elysian Fields and Riverfront corridors to be the other feeder route into this bridge. And this all would have been connected together with a very interesting helix interchange, which you can see here front and center in this rendering. Would have certainly been unique. The only thing that I can think of in the United States that comes to mind as being similar would be the approach to the Lincoln Tunnel in New Jersey that they call the helix. This kind of would have been similar to that, I suppose, although it would have not had the benefit of natural terrain. This would have all been an elevated structure that would have looped around on itself. Would have been pretty neat to drive, that's for sure.
Maybe not in a rainstorm.
Well, yeah, that's probably true too. All right, let's deal with the riverfront. We've been putting it off for a while. So, one of the centerpieces of the 1946 master plan, it was not part of the interstate system originally. It was going to be a state highway project. However, it was added to the system in 1964. So that gave it a significant boost as far as its feasibility was concerned.
And that was going to be signed as I-310. That's
right. Yep. The project was...
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, well, there it is. It was heavily advertised in the mid-1960s. At the same time that bulldozers were doing their work on Claiborne Avenue, there was talk about building this highway in front of the French Quarter and along Elysian Fields Avenue. Heavy opposition from historical interests in the quarter, as well as very affluent and influential people in the Marigny neighborhood. This took place in the late 1960s. The project was ultimately canceled in 1969 due to a huge uproar against any development in the area of the French Quarter and the Marigny. The only real construction that took place on the Riverfront Expressway was actually a tunnel. A 690 by 98 foot tunnel was constructed to support a 6-lane freeway under what is now the Harrah's Casino on Convention Center Boulevard between Canal Street and Poydras Street. It's now used as a parking facility, I believe. But the tunnel was built in the mid-1960s as part of this idea for the Riverfront Expressway.
Yep. Something I have here that I think is interesting is that one proposal. So originally, they didn't have the mileage to add it to the interstate highway system. So one proposal was to shift I-10 to the riverfront route, but in 1964, the I-420 bypass of Monroe was removed from the interstate system, and the mileage was then transferred to the Riverfront Expressway project, and so it was added October 13th, 1964 as I-310, and then after it was removed from the interstate system on August 22nd, 1969, its mileage was then transferred to be part of I-410, which we discussed earlier.
Yeah, so this interstate highway mileage did change hands quite a few times. And there was another 410 proposal that was out in Baton Rouge, and that never saw the light of day either. So they tried in a bunch of different ways to make this interstate highway mileage useful, but none of the proposals were actually successful.
I love that graphic with the octopus.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is that this is in the context, remember, this is 1967-68 when this would have been published. They're showing the Quarter and they're showing the Marigny. They're not showing Treme.
No.
You know? Which I think says something also
Yes.
about how residents felt about certain neighborhoods and people. Well, the Treme is expendable, but we can't let the French Quarter die, but we can let those people behind the French Quarter be disposable, you know.
Sadly.
Yeah, so that's something that occurred to me recently, and I thought that was it's interesting in multiple facets because it's an anti-freeway graphic, but it's anti-freeway to a point.
Right.
Well, we'll let them deal with it themselves. You know, they're on their own, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's not in my backyard, but it's also deeper than that, I think.
It is, and I think it's interesting too, because, you know, as we've previously discussed on this channel, we've talked about, you know, Baltimore, and part of why Baltimore doesn't have any freeways going smack, you know, through downtown or really through a lot of the city limits is because eventually the neighborhoods, the white neighborhoods as well as the black neighborhoods, came together to protest.
Yeah. All right. Well, we had 3 different highways taking place, or their proposals were being built or proposed at the same time, basically. And so I want to recap that for you guys before we move on. So we mentioned the riverfront, which that saga really picked up a lot of steam in the second half of the 1960s. The second half of the 60s saw the construction not very far away with the construction of the Claiborne Elevated, which, as we talked about already, the neutral ground or the median here was mowed down and made into freeway pillars, basically. And that's where it exists to this day. 610 City Park was transformed into a freeway as well. Although this met a lot more resistance than the Claiborne in terms of litigation and stuff like that. Ultimately, the state prevailed in this case. So it is interesting to study, you know, when you look at, you know, these 3 highways and the ones that were built versus the one that wasn't. It's interesting to see, and I guess perhaps it's not surprising that this is the one that never saw the light of day, because it would have gone through the most influential parts of the city. You know, Elysian Fields, as you see here, was not transformed into what Claiborne Avenue was turned into. And there's no towering freeway over Decatur Street or the rail yards behind it in the French Quarter.
That's a really powerful graphic.
You know, it is, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
where I was standing for that picture, I would have been underneath a highway.
Yeah.
And I do suspect, and I can't prove this one way or the other, but I suspect that had they built that, they would have immediately had buyer's remorse.
Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes.
And Doug and I did an episode on Portland, Oregon, and in a parallel to that I would make would be Harbor Drive in Portland, where they built it, and then they were almost immediately like, oh, we screwed up here.
Yep.
Yep. Harbor Drive in Portland being one of the earliest examples of a freeway removal project. I suspect they would have come to the same conclusion here had this seen the light of day. Mowing down yet another bucolic avenue for freeways and then building this structure over the French Quarter would not have aged very well, I suspect. That's just my thought. I don't know, I'm not sure how things would have turned out, but...
Will Carpenter mentions that Treme is underneath the octopus tentacle. We just can't see it.
You think so? I mean, it doesn't outwardly say it, but when I look at that, I see more French Quarter than I see Treme.
Agreed. Now, granted,
as far as like architecture.
Now, granted, I'm not a native, so I couldn't point out what buildings are what.
Yeah, I mean it could be, but I also think that because of what's prominent in that picture with the St. Louis Cathedral and at that time it was Lee Circle,
right,
being prominent. It was aimed at a more affluent audience. Yeah. I think. Although you could argue that. We talked about the outer bypass, the I-410 proposal that ultimately died due to environmental considerations. So I'll just show you these maps again one more time before we move on. These were found, and I have to give credit to the great and powerful Shandor, who found these in the LSU archives. Yeah. God knows how many years ago. And so that's why they exist in road geekdom to this day. And I had to use them as soon as I saw them because there's really not a whole lot of literature out there about this proposal. But something like this, the engineer in me just goes full geek when he sees something like this. All right, we have time for bridges, and then we'll pack up shop. Let's deal with the industrial canal first, which is officially, in the Army Corps of Engineers lingo, known as the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal, but most people in New Orleans refer to it as the Industrial Canal, and that's what I'm going to call it on this presentation. Now, would you like to talk about Lincoln Beach real quick? Because I didn't really know where to put these in the slideshow, so I just kind of shoved them in here. But what you see in these pictures on the right, these are old deco signs that probably go back to the 50s. They were there for they were there for the parking lots for Lincoln Beach. This is on Hain Boulevard, east of Lakefront Airport. And these signs are still here. They've been left to rot for decades. But you can still see them very visibly as you drive down the boulevard.
I would like to talk about it. I just got to find it in my notes.
That's all right. Well, while she's finding it in her notes, I'll tell you that. So there were two beaches that were open for public use on Lake Pontchartrain. There was Pontchartrain Beach, which was always the whites only beach, and then the segregated black beach was Lincoln Beach, which was further east. Pontchartrain Beach was ultimately integrated in 1964. Lincoln Beach therefore fell into disrepair and was closed shortly thereafter.
Yep. That's pretty. Yep. And that so state officials nominated it back in May to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places because of it being a major recreational spot for black residents during segregation. But yeah, as I previously mentioned, that city leaders plan to reopen the beach and use it for recreation, ecotourism, education, and events. they've secured $24.6 million, so almost $25 million in funding for the project through a bond sale.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to see if there's anything else. I mean, why this really matters is because right now the city is surrounded by water, but residents have to drive at least an hour to get to a beach that's legal to access.
Yeah, it is kind of bizarre, isn't it?
It is.
New Orleans is surrounded by water, yet there are no beaches.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
Yep. Both Pontchartrain Beach and Lincoln Beach sites are about 15 acres each. Basically, yeah. So there's, like I said, there's been progress on the for Lincoln Beach. The city started soliciting bids in June to develop a master plan for it.
Oh, good, another master plan.
I love master plans.
Yeah, New Orleans is great at master plans, people.
Master plans are my bread and butter.
Okay.
But yeah, meanwhile, the Pontchartrain Beach project has stalled after the board of the Lakefront Management Authority rejected a lease proposal from the Pontchartrain Beach Foundation back in May, after the two groups couldn't agree on the terms. But basically, the proposed master plan for the Pontchartrain, sorry, I'm not pronouncing it right, beach, called for redeveloping it for swimming, motorized and non-motorized boats, along with adding beach volleyball, bathrooms, a dog park, and food trucks. So it's unclear what's going to happen next for Pontchartrain Beach, but Lincoln Beach seems to be moving along.
Yeah, so this is why I mentioned that I wondered if this was a competing proposal with the Jazzland site, because a lot of the amenities that you're mentioning in there are kind of the same.
They are, but at the same time, my understanding, based off of what I've read from, from New Orleans East and on these projects, is that they're seen as being complementary to each other. So, I mean, and that makes sense, because swimming recreationally at a beach is a different experience than swimming at a water park.
Yeah.
And so,
I can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about if you go to, like...
Is that fireworks out there?
Oh.
I don't know. It does sound like fireworks. They're a little early.
Yes, you're right.
But, I mean, to me, and I agree with, based off of what I've read from, the word on the street, I guess, in East New Orleans, that they're seen as being two big projects that should help with renewal for the region. And like I said, I get it as somebody who, loves going to the beach and loves, using a beach vacation to also, check out a water park.
Well, yeah, I know you love it, so
I do. I think there's a place for both, and I don't think that they're competing.
I don't disagree with that idea, but yeah. I guess I would just argue that put the water park on the lakeshore. No, like put it in a spot where people are likely to go.
Or
that's what I keep coming back to.
Or you'd be like me and go to the beach when it's off season, so there's no competing water park for me to go to.
Well, I agree. I like that idea.
Well, the nice thing too about a public beach is it's generally it's a lower barrier to entry. Like, a water park is going to be more expensive, whereas, and is more of like what's the word I'm looking for? Unless you have like a season pass, is something that's more of an occasional experience.
Yeah,
whereas a public beach.
Yeah, basically you might be paying for parking.
Yeah.
Food maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's something that, regardless of income level, you can take more advantage of. And
yeah.
It's also friendly, probably, I'm sure, to dogs. And
All right, let's talk bridges here. Let's run through these real quick. Starting up at the north at the lakeshore, across from Lakefront Airport. The Seabrook Bridge was built in 1967. It basically... It's kind of considered the new bridge. It has the drawbridge in it, as you can see. The bridge that it functionally replaced is the Seabrook Railroad Bridge, which used to have cantilevered roadways on the outside, but those were removed when they built the new bridge. The railroad bridge dates to 1920. The Intracoastal Waterway / Industrial Canal was dredged in the years right after World War I, 1918 through 1920. So a few of the bridges that span the canal date to that time period, and that's because they were built at the same time as the canal itself. But the railroad bridge still carries live traffic. Next, we have the Danziger Bridge, which carries US 90 and the Chef Mentor Highway. Again, this is a modern day vertical lift bridge. The original bridge that was built here came from 1932. I've always thought this one kind of had a bit of a weird look to it.
I like it.
Yeah, it is kind of nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
The high-rise bridge, part of Interstate 10, constructed in 1965. Its steep grades and narrow lanes make it a prime trouble spot for incidents and congestion. Because of the steep grades on this bridge, trucks have a hard time maintaining speed. So this is how you oftentimes get backups on this bridge on a regular basis. Kind of one of those trouble spots in New Orleans that people always try to avoid. But in the case of I-10, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Yeah, there's fireworks going off in the background. Sorry about that. The Almonaster Railroad Bridge, this one still has its cantilevered roadways, as you can see, but they are off limits to the public. They used to be open to all traffic. I believe they closed around the time that the I-10 high-rise was built. I think the roadways are still open to Norfolk Southern Railroad related activity, but as I said, they are not open to the public. The Florida Avenue Bridge was completed literally in the weeks before Hurricane Katrina. It replaced an older bridge going back to the 1920s, which actually looked very much like the Almonaster and Seabrook Railroad bridges. This is a much wider, more modern vertical lift bridge that carries both Florida Avenue and a single track of a railroad spur, which serves as the only railroad link between the Norfolk Southern Main Line and St. Bernard Parish. We were talking earlier about money shots in New Orleans, and this is another one of my favorite ones. By the way, if you come to the New Orleans meet and bring your drone, this is a spot to check out. The Claiborne Avenue Bridge was built in, 1957. So not original to the canal's construction, but was kind of built as a supplement to the Florida Avenue and St. Claude bridges. And speaking of which, here is the St. Claude Bridge, which originally did carry rail traffic on its inside the truss. Structure was incorporated into the Industrial Canal lock structure, which you can see behind it. So what happens here is there's 2 lanes for traffic in each direction, but the outer lanes was the original roadway, and inside the truss is where there used to be railroad tracks.
Oh, wow.
But those were removed at some point, and now the whole thing is open to road traffic. Alright, so that's the Industrial Canal for you. Okay, Jason says the Almonaster vehicle lanes were open as recently as 1997. I didn't know they ran that late. Okay. I suppose that, yeah, as I said before, I suppose they're still useful for railroad vehicle traffic and stuff like that, but because the road is still maintained. It's just that it's not a public road anymore. All right. Well, and finally, let's deal with the Mississippi River. We have those bridges on screen for you to consider. We're also going to mention the ferries real quick before we wrap up, because in some respects they are as important as the bridges themselves are, depending on where you are. All right, and we begin with a big one. The I-310 bridge, named for U.S. Congressman Hale Boggs. It opened in 1983. Known during planning stages as the Luling Bridge or the Luling-Destrehan Bridge, it was renamed in honor of Hale Boggs upon his death in 1972. He died in a plane crash over Alaska. At the time of his death, he was the House Majority Leader. He served on the Warren Commission in the aftermath of the assassination of JFK. He was also one of the major proponents of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which created the interstate system that we know today. And in a bit of an unusual move, considering he was a Southern congressman, he was also a vocal advocate for the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Cool.
This bridge is actually my favorite Mississippi River bridge. I love weird-looking bridges. This is a very primitive version of the cable stayed design.
Yeah.
It's got that very futuristic European look to it. And it was one of the first cable stayed projects to be undertaken in the United States. So in some sense, it served as a prototype for this kind of construction in the U.S. Not a design that everybody likes, but it is a unique design. There's no other bridge on the Mississippi that quite looks like this one.
I like it.
It's pretty neat looking.
Maybe US 34 over in Iowa. That might look fairly similar, but that's I'll have to double check.
Yeah, you have literally hundreds of bridges to pick from, especially as the further north you go, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this bridge was completed in 1983. During its construction in 1976, there was a significant disaster that took place on the Mississippi River nearby. There had been a ferry service connecting Luling and Destrehan for years prior to the bridge's construction. And that ferry system was going to be phased out anyway as part of this project. However, on October the 20th, 1976, the George Prince, which was a ferry that serviced the Luling to Destrehan route, collided with a passing freighter in the Mississippi River and sank. I believe it was a before dawn incident in fog. 78 of the passengers and crew perished. It remains the deadliest ferry disaster in U.S. waters to this day.
Wow.
The disaster led to changes in maritime right-of-way laws and mandatory drug and alcohol testing requirements for the crew, because in autopsies that were performed, it was determined that the captain and at least a couple of the crew members were inebriated.
Ooh.
It also, the right-of-way law change is also significant in that it gave vessels that were already upriver or downriver on the Mississippi priority over craft that were going across the river. So any ferry boat or any other craft going from bank to bank had to yield automatically to traffic that was coming up or down the river. And that wasn't a law at the time. It's one of those things where you think about it and you're like, well, of course that makes sense. It's like when you come to a stop sign at a T intersection or something on the highway out here, for instance. It's like, well, yeah, of course you're going to stop there. But it is sad that it takes tragedies like this for common sense stuff like that to be put into law, into code.
Probably because you would expect common sense to prevail, but then when it does, like, okay, like we actually do need to enforce.
It's always the 1 or 2% that ruin it for everybody else. Yeah.
Is it just me, or is that an odd Bible verse to have at a memorial where people drowned? In the rivers you shall not drown, for I am the Lord. Yet people drowned there. Any biblical scholars in the chat have any insight on that? I don't find any comfort in that. Like,
my best guess is that they're trying to say that they won't drown in the afterlife or something.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that might be it.
Okay.
Yeah, so
But
this
still, it is kind of odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this memorial is located on the north end of the bridge. So if you're in the area and want to check this out, you certainly can do so. The names of the 78 people who perished are on this memorial wall in the background. The Huey P. Long Bridge, which I have to emphasize at this point, is one of the two bridges with that name on the Mississippi River in Louisiana. The other one is up in Baton Rouge. We're talking about the one here in Greater New Orleans. This one was completed in 1935. However, when you look at it today, it looks nothing like what it used to look like in the 1930s. A massive reconstruction project was undertaken in 2008 through 2013. It reconstructed and widened the superstructure. It added new roadways on the outside and reconstructed the foundations so that it basically widened the bridge's footing so that a wider structure could be built atop of it.
Wow.
This was an interesting project because they had to build all this new superstructure steel while keeping the existing highway operational, which was not an easy task. The original truss superstructure was just this section in the middle.
Oh.
So that's the middle piece right here, and this is where the railroad runs. Outside the truss, outside the original truss, this is all new in the last 15 years.
Wow.
Wow.
The roadways here are 3 lanes each direction with full width shoulders. Originally, they were, like, if you were lucky, they were 8 feet lanes and no shoulders.
Oof.
Yeah, it was just 2 lanes here. It wasn't 3.
So the outer portion, are you saying that that was built from scratch, or that there was an earlier bridge there?
No, so everything. See, this is why I can't stand this thing, because it doesn't work most of the time. Let me try it this way. So here, this is the original in here.
Yep.
And then out here is new, and out here, right?
Okay.
So in order to build all this out here, they first had to expand the foundations in place. So they built new pilings and they integrated the existing footing into the new footings that were immediately on the outside. And you see how there are these legs. If I go back here, you see how there are these legs that protrude outwards?
Yep.
So those are not original either. Those were added as well later. So it allows you to cantilever outside the original footing and build the new truss work on the outside of the structure.
Right. And you can also tell too that they are basically just by looking at the color of the pilings, you can tell basically which part was basically.
Yeah, you can kind of tell, right? A little bit. Yeah. Apparently, this was the easier choice, because the reason they did not just replace the bridge outright is because it's an active railroad bridge.
Oh.
So it's not like they could. I mean, I guess they could have built a new bridge just for the highway and just torn down the old roadway and called it a day. But they decided against that and just did a complete rebuild of the original structure. Which, as I said, was completed in 2013. The railroad component of this bridge, by the way, if you include the long approaches and all that, it's about a 4.5 or 5 mile long bridge.
Wow.
Yeah, because it gets up to a pretty significant height of like 170 feet above the river. And of course, at a 1% grade for heavy freight, that means your approaches have to go, all the way across the parish, basically. So that's really the reason why they didn't just tear down and start over, because the railroad component of it has always been sufficient. It's just that the road component of it was always lacking, basically. I mean, it was built for Model Ts or whatever, and 8-foot lanes, they were probably sufficient in 1935, but not today, All right, the southernmost bridge on the Mississippi River is the Crescent City Connection, right at downtown New Orleans. As you can see, it's a parallel span. The first of the two bridges was built in 1958. Its original name was the Greater New Orleans Bridge, although a lot of people, both then and now, refer to it as the Mississippi River Bridge. But it became known as the Crescent City Connection after the parallel span was completed in 1988. The following year, there was a public naming contest in the Metro. Fortunately for all of us, the choice of Bridgie McBridgeface did not win.
Right. And I think too, that's before that was really thought of as a thing.
Yeah, right. That was back when people took those things seriously, too.
Or a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, Crescent City Connection is fine.
Yeah.
I don't. It's a memorable name anyway. The parallel span was built from 1980 to 1988, and it was known originally. This was, of course, before they renamed the whole crossing, but it was known as Greater New Orleans Bridge Number 2. I suspect that was a working title. They probably, in the back of their minds, knew they were going to try to rebrand the whole crossing once the parallel span was in place. The bridges, as you can see, are not quite in parallel with each other. They're actually offset by about 400 feet, which is a bit of a wide gap for parallel bridges. You might wonder why that is, and there's actually a very good reason for it. As I've referenced before, there's not a whole lot of good soil in New Orleans to build large structures on, like tall bridges like this. So what happens is when you build your foundations for any structure in this kind of a soil, it has an impact on the soil around it and the structures around it. And so if you build structures this big and heavy too close to each other, they end up negatively impacting one another in that both structures end up wanting to sink into the ground.
Yeah, and going back to the Huey Long Bridge, that might have been why they decided to basically, kind of build out the structure as opposed to building a new bridge.
That certainly could have been part of it, yeah. Because, any kind of parallel span there would have had to be located well away from the existing alignment.
Yeah.
So these bridges are located 400 feet apart to eliminate the possibility of the two interacting with each other adversely and causing settlement of both structures. There was a lot of engineering considerations that went into this and some of the other elevated highways in New Orleans for the same reason. As they stand, like if you take each of these bridges individually, they are each one of the largest steel cantilever truss bridges on the planet. When you put the two of them together in such a setting, it really is a spectacular sight.
I was going to say, these pictures are amazing.
Yeah, well, as I said, if you have a drone, New Orleans is one of those places to go check out because you won't run out of places to photograph. The Crescent City Connection, when it opened in 1958, was a toll bridge. The tolls were removed in the 1960s after the bonds for their construction were paid off. Tolls were reintroduced in the 1980s to help fund construction of the parallel span, and then the tolls were removed for good in 2013. And actually, the toll plaza was right there, right where the expressway touches down on ground briefly before it takes off again on the elevated.
Ferries!
We don't get to talk about boats very often on this channel, but I'd like to talk about ferries for a second.
Yay! I rode this ferry.
Yeah, this is probably the one that most people ride, and if they visit New Orleans, yeah. Because it takes off from the foot of Canal Street and takes you over to Algiers Point.
Yeah.
Which, I suppose there's been some sort of an informal ferry service across the river at this point, going all the way back to the initial French settlement of 1718. Because Algiers was founded right about the same time as the initial settlement on the opposite bank of the river. So there's always been some sort of cross-river traffic in this area. But an official commercial ferry service was established in 1827. And it's been running at this location ever since. And yeah, this is this is the ferry ride that is the most touristy because it's right downtown and it's easy to reach. And you are treated to sites like this if you take a ride on it.
Got to walk around Algiers Point too, which was really nice. I wish I remember where I got coffee.
Yeah, Algiers is a sneaky good place to visit. Yeah.
I got a really good cup of coffee when I was over there too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wish I remember where, but.
Okay. So we go from the oldest of the ferry services down this way to the newest of the ferry services, and this is the Chalmette Lower Algiers Ferry, which commenced operation in 1969. It was started kind of as traffic was ticking up, you know, in the years before they started construction of the parallel Crescent City span. But then that bridge opened, and then the traffic situation was sorted out in the city in the 90s, and then traffic counts on this ferry kind of fell off quite a bit. But it is kind of the most direct route to connect you with between Algiers and St. Bernard Parish. We also have a ferry connecting Belchase and Upper Plaquemines Parish with the community of Scarsdale on the east bank of the river. This one has been in service since 1959. It is the southernmost crossing available for heavy commercial traffic, in other words, trucks of any sort. Because the next ferry downriver, by the way, before I get to that, the English Turn is near where this ferry operates. The English Turn is named as such because the French settlers in the 1700s encountered a British fleet at this point in the river. It's a prominent near 180-degree bend in the Mississippi. And they encountered the British, who were also looking to settle this area, and the French basically, you know, the short version of it is they told the English to F off. And so the English turned around and left, and this area somehow became known as the English Turn as a result of that, or the English Bend in the river. Nowadays, it's just where all the freighters await passage up the Mississippi. It's a giant anchorage point in the river, more or less. And the southernmost ferry crossing, or the southernmost commercial crossing of the Mississippi River, is here at Point Allahatch, which this ferry service has been around since 1933.
Just wondering, is the "ah" supposed to have an accent mark on it?
I think it does.
Yeah.
I just don't have it here, but I think that's right.
It's two different words in French, and the one without the accent mark would not make any sense here.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so this community has been the parish seat since the creation of Plaquemines Parish, going back to the 1700s. If you take this ferry, you can get on the ferry if you take either Belchase Highway south, or if you take Highway 39 south out of St. Bernard Parish, and it takes you right to the ferry landing. And right across from the ferry landing is the old courthouse. The ruins of it are still there. There was a fire in 2002 which burned out most of the structure. And ever since then, the parish offices have been basically housed in trailers. There's been talk over the years about moving the parish seat to Belchase, which is where most of the parish's population lives today. However, voters have rejected that proposal on multiple occasions. So, sort of counterintuitively, I suppose the reason why the parish seat is still here is because it is one of the more central locations in the parish. Because, of course, there's still a significant distance worth of communities downriver even from here. But yeah, it is still here. It's one of those places that is largely forgotten about nowadays. I might do a blog article on that community at some point.
Yeah,
because it is
I
an
think
interesting.
you should,
It
yeah.
is an interesting little spot.
Yeah, I think you should.
And 184 slides later, we've finally arrived at the end. So, hooray!
We made it!
And you even picked up a hitchhiker along the way.
That's right.
Oh yeah, hi Doug. Join us next. I guess it's still technically next year, but join us in February.
In a month and a half.
You get to run into people like me, and Lord knows who else is going to show up for it.
And you get to have some beignets.
We were talking about that when we went live. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I could go for some of that right now myself.
Yeah,
you know?
they're pretty tasty.
They are. And next week we're going to take a ride up I-55 and talk about Memphis. That'll be the subject of next Saturday's
I
presentation.
think I'd rather paddle up the river.
Yeah, good luck with that.
I
better get started.
I do own a kayak.
Yeah, you better get started.
Are you going to be walking in Memphis?
Well, I know we did Adam did a blog article about that recently on Verbal Nation.
Nice.
While walking over like one of the bridges in Memphis.
Oh yeah, he did the what is that? What do they call it now? The big river crossing or something like that?
I'd have to look.
I have a week to figure it out. So yeah, I mean, it's open season now. If anybody has any questions or anything they want to ask, now's a good time to do it. We're at the 3-hour mark already, so I don't want to take too much longer, but I will play a couple of videos while we do a couple of wrap-up discussions here in the background. So yeah, the meet itself is basically set. Like all the points of interest are in place, and at this point it's just a matter of me putting all the itinerary documents together and all that. So I'm hoping to have that done by the end of January for you guys. But there are links to the Facebook event pages. There's the AARoads forum information page that I don't know. I didn't post it in the chat this time, and I don't think I have it in the video description. So maybe I'll do that right now. But yeah, come down and check out, see what we're going to cover, and come on down and join us if this is your kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to have you.
New Orleans is such a great city.
Yeah, so you've been there once before.
Once. I was there, like I said, I was there in 2018 for the National Planning Conference.
Yeah, I went in 2018 it was April I went, and I took a flight.
Oh, that's when I was there! And Corco was there!
I took a flight from Boston.
You just didn't run into each other.
And apparently, it was the weekend that WrestleMania was at the Superdome.
Nice.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
not a wrestling fan, so I had no idea. That I go on the plane, I'm like, why is everyone wearing wrestling shirts? And my cousin basically said, saw that I was in New Orleans. He's like, oh, you're gonna be down for WrestleMania? I'm like, Mike, you know I don't watch wrestling. I'm like, you've known me for how many decades?
There is one wrestler that I love, and once I tell y'all her name, you will understand why.
Is her name Laura?
Her name is Bianca Belair.
Oh. Okay, I can appreciate that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
How is her last name spelled?
Belair, just like the town.
With or without the space?
That's a good question. Because normally it's...
That's why we have the internet.
That's why we have the internet.
Yeah, thank you, Wisconsin, for posting the link to the AARoads forum information.
There is no space, but that doesn't matter. It's still...
So it's like Bel
Air
Road.
It's right, yeah.
Which, speaking of things that are spelled and or pronounced differently, the town in Maryland, town of Bel Air has the space, and Belair Road does not.
Oh, it's pronounced
I
differently,
never noticed that.
Well, we pronounce it Belair here too, but it's really obvious Belair with the Balmer accent.
It would, yeah.
Meanwhile, in the Catskills, we have Bel Air Mountain, which is spelled Belleayre.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
They got fancy with that spelling.
Well, you can go skiing there, and when you're not skiing, you can take a gondola up to the top of the mountain.
Ooh, gondola.
Or you can hike up the mountain.
Oh, apparently Bel Air is also a car with the space. And then Bel Air No Space is a defunct menthol cigarette. Who knew?
Okay.
So this is the
Bel Air.
This is why I'm very glad that we have the people that we have in the live chat, because you learn just as much reading the live chat as you do listening to us.
It's true.
I pulled up to a house about 7 or 8, and I yelled to the cabbie, "Go home, smell you later."
Hey. Yeah. So right now this video is the West Bank Expressway. We already passed over the high-level Harvey Canal span. If you were to pan this camera to the left about 90 degrees, you'd have an impressive view of downtown and the Crescent City connection off to your left. So this highway, as I said, and if you look at it on a map, you'll notice this, that it kind of does a 180-degree turn to cross the Mississippi River on an east-west alignment, except it's backwards because you're driving the bridge in the compass west direction, but you're on the eastbound lanes of US 90 Business. I know we kind of already went over the lake-bound versus river-bound expressway nomenclature earlier in the program, but that's a refresher for why that's the case.
Especially if you join late, like me.
Yeah, especially slackers like you.
Those HOV lane signs look like
I mean,
Long
I
Island
did hike the
Expressway.
Appalachian Trail today, so.
Yes.
Yeah, you did a nice hike today, right?
Yeah, I went up to Annapolis Rock,
Okay.
which is west of Frederick. And,
So not near Annapolis.
nope, not near Annapolis. And it is basically where the Appalachian Trail crosses I-70. So the trail actually, basically the parking's on US 40. You walk down the trail, and basically where you hit the Appalachian Trail, it's at the overpass where 70, where the trail crosses over 70. Which is actually at the county line and at the crest of South Mountain. I did get some pictures from the overpass.
Nice.
Nice.
All right.
And then I hiked up to Annapolis Rock. It was about 4.5 miles or so, a little over 2 hours. Nothing really too strenuous, so that's something if you're in Maryland, you want to take a nice hike, you don't want to do anything, let's say, too strenuous. Let's say you have younger kids, or let's say you're not much into hiking, but you're like, hey, I want to go for a hike. That's a good one to do.
Cool.
And you get a nice view from the rock.
How much is the elevation gain?
I think it's about
This is why we have the internet.
500. Yeah, this is right with the internet. All right, hold on.
While Doug is looking that up, we are driving on the inbound bridge, which was the second bridge constructed.
784 feet.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
So there's 4 lanes of general use, and we didn't mention the HOV lanes earlier, but we should spend a moment on those. The HOV was conceived as part of the Parallel Span project and the larger reconstruction of the Pontchartrain Expressway through downtown. And this was another one of those projects that was conceived and built when commuter patterns in New Orleans were very different than what they are today. And this is part of the problem with the highway system in the city, is that traffic patterns are not what they were in the 80s before the downturn economically. Nowadays there's not a whole lot of traffic commuting to downtown anymore. A lot of the traffic is going out to Jefferson Parish. It's going out to the West Bank in some cases. So this HOV, the flyover that you see in the middle here, was designed for commuter traffic that doesn't really exist anymore. So a lot of the HOV infrastructure goes highly underutilized. So there's been talk about what to do about the HOV. There's recently been a push to introduce a bus rapid transit corridor to this area that would utilize the HOV roadway. Because because the HOV on the bridge is 2 lanes. So the idea there would be you could make it 1 lane each direction full time.
Yeah. And not have to, basically get rid of the existing infrastructure. Which, I mean,
Right.
if things change, you might want to have, that, the HOV lanes or something similar there. So bus rapid transit would be a good way to go.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, New Orleans is one of the biggest transit-starved cities in America. Like, there's no, other than the streetcar system in the city, there's no rail transit to speak of, and the bus system is not entirely reliable either.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing some sort of a BRT to connect like points out by the airport with downtown, or like downtown with Algiers Point, using the Crescent City connection, those are ideas that I think will start to pick up some steam here in the years to come. Because frankly, when you look at that parallel span of the CCC, that's 2 lanes of real estate that is never really used any close to what it could be. It's wasted space, and it's valuable space that goes unused. There aren't that many Mississippi River bridges in this area.
Right.
So where I come in on this issue is I want to see that lane mileage used, to its potential. And if it's not going to be used in an HOV purpose, well, then we need to figure out some way to make it useful, to fit the commuter patterns of today. Because it was a nice idea when it was drawn up in the late 70s. You had more predictable commuter patterns back then. Most people's commutes terminated downtown, whereas nowadays people are not getting off the expressway downtown. They're continuing through downtown on the expressway to get to work in Metairie. Well, that doesn't work very well with the infrastructure that we have currently. Another possibility would be to create some sort of a HOT facility.
Yeah.
And then provide connections to I-10 at the end instead of it dumping you onto the local streets at the end. That is something that could possibly work also.
Yeah.
So there are possibilities here. There are discussions being had at the state level about what to possibly do with this HOV facility, but that's one of those things that we'll have to stay tuned on in the years ahead.
Mm.
So we transitioned onto, we went from US 90 Business East to I-10 West, right when we went by the Superdome.
Yeah.
And so this is the upper end of the Pontchartrain Expressway as we reach West End Boulevard, and then the highway takes a hard turn to the left to enter Jefferson Parish at the 17th Street Canal. And that's, of course, the city line as well. So, Doug, you have been to Louisiana that one time in 2018?
Yeah,
or?
just one time.
Okay.
I was there for like 3 days.
And you have not been there?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah, it's if you've never been, it's New Orleans is definitely worth visiting.
Yeah.
What I did was, I saw the French Quarter. I went to a plantation. I just did a bunch of driving, saw some of the bridges, went up towards Baton Rouge, things like that. So.
Yeah, I'll show you the
Had
HOV.
drive-through daiquiris.
Of course, you gotta have one of those.
Well, the thing with that, of course, is I guess basically if you don't put the straw in, it's not considered open container.
Oh.
That's what I've heard.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a very Louisiana thing that it's not really talked about, but you see it everywhere. They have daiquiri places.
That's right.
But I had stayed at a hotel that was actually right next door to a daiquiri place, so that was pretty convenient.
Okay, so this is the HOV facility I was telling you about before. So this is that ramp that was above us when we came off the bridge. You have a beautiful view of the Superdome to the left, right here. And we'll take the bridge going the other direction, out of the city.
I'm curious who you had driving with you to be able to be in the HOV.
Okay, so you want to know a dirty little secret?
What?
There was nobody in the car besides me. Because NOPD does not do enforcement of the HOV.
Ah.
So,
Got it.
and frankly, from a traffic standpoint, I can understand why they don't, because frankly, there are no carpools going downtown anyway. So, as I said, like, unless you have like perpetrators like me causing trouble and driving this as a single occupant, then there would be basically nobody on this.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I drove this as a single occupant. And, you know, it was like, alright, whatever.
You had a passenger in spirit.
I guess, you could say that.
How did you know that it wasn't enforced?
I know what's going on.
Heard
you
things.
Know, you check the message boards and you see what's going on, you know.
Yeah. I guess also an HOV lane ticket. I assume that doesn't get you points on your license.
No.
Yeah. So worst case scenario, I guess you're out $100 or something.
Or whatever, like whatever it would have been, yeah. But yeah, as you see, this was the middle of a weekday, I would say. This was right around, so the lanes are, as you can obviously tell, are reversible. So they are pointed westbound or towards downtown in the morning, and they're pointed in the other direction in the afternoon. So this was right around the time when the directions shifted. But as you can see, like the lanes on the general use on both spans are packed, and there's just nobody in this central roadway, which again is kind of messed up because it's 2 lanes of valuable real estate on the Mississippi River that really should be utilized a lot better than this.
Seems like something that could make a good candidate for express toll lanes.
Well, I mentioned the HOT option
Right.
Yeah.
as a
Plus
possibility.
The bus rapid trans was the other thing we talked about.
Yeah, so I think that either one of those would be a decent candidate. Because, yeah, I mean, you can't... It's very difficult to have the traffic problems that they have and then just have this beautiful roadway sitting there that's just... that can very easily be part of the solution if it's utilized correctly.
Yep.
But...
Sorry, I stepped away for a minute. I had a phone call. What road are we on?
Well, I was just showing them the HOV lanes on the Crescent City connection.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So, anyway, now that you've seen that, I probably will try to incorporate that into one of the driving tours on one of the days. Because it is an interesting facility in its own right. And it is, I believe it's the only HOV roadway in the state.
Oh wow.
If I'm
Wow.
not mistaken. Yeah, there's nothing up north, and then I'm trying to think if there's another example of an HOV setup in the state of Louisiana. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I think we'll go another 10 minutes here on the stream in case anybody's got any questions before we close up shop, but I'll show you the airport flyovers that were completed in 2023. I have flown to this airport twice. The first time was in 2017, and I got to go through the old terminal.
Right. When I went, that's when the old terminal was still open, but there were signs saying, hey, we're going to be building a new terminal.
Yeah, right. And then, so I flew into the new terminal in 23. And so I got to see both the old and the new. And then, you know, there are people who are sentimental towards the old facility, but the new one's not too bad. in its own right. As I mentioned before, my biggest beef with that whole setup is the fact that they stupidly left the rental car center in the old place.
Yeah.
So you gotta take like a half-hour bus ride just to get to the rental car facility.
Right, which I think the old terminal basically just walked over to the rental car.
I think it, yeah. Well, yeah, because it was
Well,
right.
at least that's how I did it.
I think, yeah, I think they're right next to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is how it usually is at most airports in civilized society. But they haven't. Well, see, but this whole airport thing was a fiasco from the start because they built the terminal without having the connecting infrastructure in place or without a plan to build it.
Yeah, I mean, something like this in modern times, yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
But you know, I've been to plenty of airports where I've had to take a shuttle to the rental car.
Yeah.
Some are, you know, basically within the airport property. Some of them were basically however far down the road, like Phoenix, Atlanta, LAX, that was all. Down to Sacramento, it's just, you know, where the parking lots are.
Yeah.
You want to know the longest I've had to travel to get a rental car before?
Uh-oh.
From London Gatwick Airport to London Heathrow. Because our flight itinerary changed.
Okay.
But I didn't change the rental car.
Uh-oh.
Oops. So, yeah.
Well, that went well, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, at least in Albany, the rental car counter is right across the hall from the baggage claim.
That's very
Yeah,
convenient.
I think that's true, right?
Yeah. I will rent cars from my home airport. So
Really?
often,
Is that? Do you get a better deal that way, or?
Well, if I don't want to put mileage on my car, especially if it's a longer trip.
Okay.
I just park, $6 a day at economy lot and just go.
Oh, so you park in the, I guess that's the economy lot? Where
the economy lot, where it's $6 a day.
And then you just take the shuttle over and then you pick up your car. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I've done that plenty of
That's
times.
never occurred to me. All right. Because, that's easily the cheapest parking of any airport I've been to.
Bradley, they have a similar price for
Is
the
it?
setup, yeah.
It's more expensive than that in Newburgh, even.
Yeah, Syracuse was $13 a day.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
That's another story for another time.
But yeah, just for funsies, I looked it up. Gatwick and Heathrow are 43 miles apart.
Wow.
Yeah, we took.
You better.
We took a bus.
Well, I'm just
that
thinking,
took mostly the M25.
I'm just thinking.
That's like driving from Baltimore to Washington for a rental car.
Yes.
I'm just thinking.
Now that you phrase it that way, that's terrible.
From JFK to Newark, how far is that? It may not quite be 40, but it could be 30, 35.
Yeah,
Definitely
well.
worth a headache or two.
Yeah, well, as the crow flies, it's probably not that far, but
Yeah.
because BQE, it's like 8 hours. Or whatever.
That's not 8 hours, but 1 to 2.
Well, on a good day. So so Sconson requested that I show the tunnel.
Look at that
Yeah,
construction.
especially since this is a vintage video now.
Yeah.
It is. You cannot drive the tunnel anymore. The tunnel was
As
closed.
of the 20th of December.
Right. So you can see the new construction off to the left. And the tunnel, as we said, was closed about 11 days ago.
Rainy's a tunnel girl. She'd be very disappointed.
Well, she would love this tunnel because it leaks. Or it used to leak. And people, I think Jason used to call this the car wash. Because it would always drip on the inside.
Wow.
Yep. So it's almost like it was raining inside.
Which tunnels have you taken her through? I'm guessing Fort McHenry and Baltimore Harbor.
Oh yeah, I mean she's been through those quite a bit.
Yeah.
I have not done a proper inventory of all the tunnels.
Yeah.
Because I know we've taken. I know we've taken her in some in the Hampton Roads area
Nice.
and in
Oh, the bridge tunnel's there.
yeah,
Yes.
and then New York.
Oh, those are cool. I haven't been to them yet, but
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
they certainly look cool.
Yes.
And you can take her through some mountain tunnels.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you done any of those yet, or no?
Yes.
You have. Okay.
When I took her by myself to the Cleveland meet.
Oh, okay.
That would do it.
Yeah.
Oh, and
That's
I
still a
think-
very proud accomplishment of mine that I took a 2-year-old by myself to a road meet 6
That's-
hours away.
That's pretty badass.
Yeah.
It is pretty
Yeah.
badass. Thank you.
Here's the
Wait,
Harvey
Cleveland
tunnel,
is only 6 hours from here?
or the
Yeah.
Harvey Nell. It's missing a
Yeah.
couple letters.
Carbonell.
Oh, to answer your question about distance from JFK to Newark,
Yes.
if you take the Belt, the Verrazano, Staten Island Expressway, 34 miles.
Okay.
Mm.
So I was basically right there.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
takes you 2 days.
Yeah.
Actually, the question is, there is another way to do it, which is air train to LIRR to New Jersey Transit.
Oh boy.
And if you're doing it during rush hour, that might actually be faster.
Right, or if there's considerable traffic on the Belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
All right, I've shown you 2 tunnels. I'll show you the third tunnel,
Yay!
which is out. So the first 2 I've shown you are in the West Bank area, and then the third one is out in Homa. So you got to drive. It's like an hour and a half to get to Homa from New Orleans. But if you're interested in clinching tunnels or
Yay,
what have you,
tunnels.
the Homa tunnel is worth the trip.
Tunnels, ferries, bridges. New Orleans has it all.
Yes, it
Yep.
does.
Now, on the topic of mountain tunnels, did you know that the first time I went through one was when I was in college?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
West
I
Rock?
bet I know which one it was. Yeah,
You
What he
probably
said.
do know which one it was.
West Rock.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wait, where is West
New
Rock?
New Haven.
It's on the Wilbercross Parkway in New Haven.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because Yale,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the first tunnel I've ever been through, and it may have been the McHenry tunnel.
Mm.
So then we went.
Oh, I can definitely tell you what the first one I went through was.
But the first mountain tunnel.
No, I meant just first any kind of tunnel.
Yeah.
I bet that my first would have been the Lehigh Tunnel,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
that would have been when my parents made the trip pretty frequently between Wilmington and Binghamton before they
Yeah.
moved.
I did that one with Patrick on the way back from the Utica meet in 2015.
Yeah.
So, anyone want to guess what the first any kind of tunnel that I went through was?
I'm gonna guess the Lincoln Tunnel.
No, I'm gonna guess.
Queens Midtown.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Okay,
not-
actually, that might have been the first tunnel I took.
You know what?
Where I'm from, you kind of need the Midtown Tunnel to get to the Lincoln Tunnel.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do
Well, I mean,
the
I
Queensboro Bridge.
I grew up along
You
that
could
road,
be
actually,
Anthony
yeah.
and do the Queensboro Bridge to whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the Williamsburg.
Yep.
Actually, Queens Midtown. Actually, yeah, that would have been my first tunnel, not Fort McHenry. Well, Fort McHenry was early too.
Yeah.
Let me see. I did not take any tunnels today, so
Well, that's too bad.
nah, I took 675 around the northern arc of Baltimore.
I see.
675?
I think it's
695.
Oh, 695. Okay.
695, yay.
Yeah. I was on there too today.
Yay.
Yesterday I went through a tunnel.
Yeah, I would assume my first time.
mountain tunnel. Now I think of it, might have been in South Dakota.
See, I like how you never would have expected us to be talking about land tunnels on a New Orleans presentation, right?
Right.
But,
So my first tunnel was hello bridge.
Mhm.
No, mine. I'd bet the family farm that my first tunnel was the Fort McHenry.
Yeah, that makes
Mm.
sense.
I don't really know what my first mountainous tunnel was.
Yeah,
I think it's safe to say that the Fort McHenry Tunnel was my first tunnel outside of New York City.
Mm. Okay.
Unless you count subway tunnels.
Well, I mean...
Because if you count those, then I was in Boston and D.C., so...
I thought you were going to say you were born in a tunnel.
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Rainy's first tunnel would have... Wait, which one was her first tunnel?
See, now you got to think about it.
I know, see,
Yeah.
because it's not as easy as... Because we're road geeks, it's not just an easy assumption that, oh yeah, you know.
But yeah, my first.
Yeah, right.
It's going to be like the most direct tunnel, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first mountain tunnel was in South Dakota.
Okay.
Nice.
We drove cross country one year when I was growing up. We went through the Black Hills.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Was that US 14?
Something like that.
Some-
16, isn't it? Or
16 might be it, yeah.
or
Okay.
was 16...
14's up that way too.
Is it 16A that has all the tunnels and stuff that
Yeah,
goes
I think
through?
So yeah.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
I should know. I actually used to have a T-shirt with the shield on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I can tell you the last mountain tunnel that I went through. It's 9D.
Okay.
Ah!
Yeah.
Hi, Remo. Nice of you to join us.
Well, kitty cat.
I almost saw
And
it
as
as-
the kitty cat makes its grand entrance into our living room, I'm gonna start to wrap up shop here. So I want to thank my gracious co-host Laura for another job well done. Thank you for letting us come over and do a show in your living room.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Also, thank you to... We're having kitty cat issues here. Thank you to David Golub of East Coast Roads. Thank you to Doug Kerr for being tardy but showing up anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to talk about anything you're doing on Gribble Nation?
Well, I just uploaded a few different blog articles. I did one. I'm hoping to get around to doing more of the road trips that I've done, and basically put them into like a blog format. I posted one that's been sitting around for a while, and I finally typed it up about a trip I took to Vermont. Of course, Vermonting.
Yay,
It was part of a 2-day trip. I went to the Adirondacks the second day.
Right.
But hoping to do a little bit more of that. I did a covered bridge article last week out in the Netcher Road Bridge, which is in Ashtabula County, Ohio. That was another one.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, so there's plenty of good stuff on the Gribble Nation blog, and I'm sure that we'll come up with stuff to keep us busy in the next year.
Yeah.
So, Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Hope to see some of y'all down in New Orleans in February. And I think with that, we're going to call this a night. Call this a show.
Good night,
Yeah.
everyone.
So, you have been watching a Roadway Wiz live presentation. I hope you found this one useful. And we look forward to seeing you next week. It's a short week. We're going to be right back at it in just 6 days with
Yeah.
another show and another co-production with the cast of characters that we have as
Yeah.
fellow road geeks. So
Who knows? You might even hear this guy.
maybe. That's possible. But until then, thank you all very much for watching. Hope to see you in New Orleans. And until next time, take care. Happy New Year. Happy travels.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.